Welcome to the November 1st meeting of the Salt Lake City Historic Landmarks Commission. We have a pretty big agenda tonight, so we'll try to keep things moving along briskly, but we do want to have time to hear from the public, so you will all be included. We'll report on what we've done so far. The commissioners took a field trip to visit the Union Depot project and the project at 1017 First Avenue. And then commissioners had dinner. We did not discuss any items of business, and we're here for the meeting. Michaela or Paul, is there anything that you need to update the commission on, please?
I wanted to update the commission on the mayor's decision on the economic hardship, with regard to the economic hardship.
Michaela, would you speak into the microphone, please?
Is this better?
Yes. Thank you.
The mayor's decision on the Historic Landmark Commission's economic hardship review panel findings for the 3 Bishop Place properties. Just to let you all know that the mayor overturned the economic hardship panel and the Landmark Commission's decision for demolition, ultimately granting demolition for those 3 properties.
Okay. Robert, have you got anything to add to the commission?
I don't. Thank you.
You are welcome. Next item will be approval of the minutes for September 6th, 2018. Those of you who have read the minutes, any of you wish to make any changes to them, or can I hear a motion to approve?
Esther, aye.
Oh, well, I think we need a motion to approve, please. Doesn't need a roll call? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Do it. Oh, okay. I guess we need an official motion and a second, please.
I move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No, the motion passes. Minutes are approved. Okay, what's next? The first item on the agenda is regarding new construction at 690 North. Public comments. Thank you. Oh, by the way, this is my first meeting as chairman, so please excuse me if I stumble over things or I get a nudge from Paul or Robert to do things properly. Public comments that are not directly related to any of the agenda items. We have one card from Cindy Cromer. No?
Hers is Union Depot.
You're Union Pacific.
Union Pacific,
Okay.
yeah.
Do we have any public comments that are not related to items on the agenda? Seeing none, we will then move into, thank you, Paul. We will move into the first item on the agenda, which is new construction at approximately 690 Northwest Capitol Street. This was an item that was presented to the commission previously and is returned to us, and there is additional public comment that we'd like to hear, but I need to ask the commission if we can approve opening up the public comment session again. Is there anyone on the commission opposed to opening public comment on this? No?
Are we going to hear a second presentation from the applicant or no?
Yes, you are.
Yes, we will. Okay. Yes, so staff will present that, and then the applicant, and then public comments, the normal procedure. But we just had to formally open the public comment session again as part of this process. So we'll begin with staff presentation.
Good evening. Thank you. This is a request for a certificate of appropriateness for new construction in the Capitol Hill Historic District, along with the request for 2 special exceptions, one for building height and one for exterior wall height. As Kenton mentioned, the HLC heard this request on March 1st of this year. The project was tabled to give the applicant an opportunity to respond to concerns of the public and the Historic Landmark Commission. I've outlined the concerns and the applicant's response in the memorandum for tonight's meeting that you have. You've been provided meeting minutes, the original staff report, and a set of revised plans for consideration. I want to mention that you've also received written public comment, all that we've received since the time that the memorandum for tonight's meeting was prepared and distributed. Those have been placed in the Dropbox. I hope you've had an opportunity to review those. I am going to let the applicant talk to you about the plan revisions tonight, as well as the course of events that has occurred since the original hearing in March. Finally, planning staff recommends that the HLC approve the request as modified from the original plans entertained at the hearing on March 1st. And with that said, I'm going to turn the time over to the applicant unless you have questions of me.
Any questions for Carl? All right, thanks, Carl. Would the applicant please come forward? That's Lex. Sorry, Lex.
We know what you meant.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you talking about Michaela?
Yeah.
Commission, thank you for having us back. My name is Jacob Ballstead. I'm with Garbett Homes. To my left is Tyler Kirk with Think Architecture and Scott Howell with Garbett Homes. So I think what I want to do is just give a brief recap of what's happened over the last 6 months since our first meeting. I think the overwhelming message from last time is that we needed to do a little more work and spend more time with the neighbors and better understand their concerns. I mean, there was quite a bit of comment from the neighborhood last time around, and so that's really where we focused our efforts. Scott, Tyler, and I took the opportunity to hold an open house and invited neighborhoods. We contacted a couple of the, I would say, leaders of the neighborhood and organized a meeting and had really healthy, good discussion where people were free to express their opinions and feelings about our proposals, good or bad. And we just listened to what they had to say. And our goal was to understand their concerns and do everything we could to address them and fix them. And from that meeting, I think the big objectives or the big objections that we had is that people didn't like the redundant nature of the plans. They didn't like that they were all the same architecture on every building. They didn't like that they were all the same color. And they didn't like that they were all lined up right in a row, totally parallel with the street. And so, you know, after that meeting, after some private discussions and some additional efforts, we went back to the drawing board and started working on some changes. So some of those changes originated with the site plan. Our goal was to try to break up the street. One of the unique characteristics of the street and most of Marmalade is that, you know, the houses aren't exactly perpendicular to the road. They're asymmetrical. They don't line up exactly. And so we made some articulation in the build. We changed the articulation in its relation to the street. We angled some of the buildings, some more drastically than others. If you look in close detail, we added some articulation and depth between one unit and the other unit within buildings to create some additional relief along the front architecture. Come back to some of these, but this is one of the new elevations that we proposed to the neighborhood. I'm going to jump to some of the street scenes that you can see of the new product. This is on the north end of the property, looking kind of southeast. This is how they look, you know, the two elevation styles. This is the south end where we opened it up a little bit more. The area in the hill is not quite as steep here, and so we had more room to set the buildings off further, create more space between the buildings and the streets. Additional views of that. So after we incorporated these changes, we had a second neighborhood meeting and invited everybody back. And we had good showing and we had good feedback. And I think overwhelmingly the comments that we got from the neighborhood was that, one, they were very appreciative of the time we gave them to listen to them and hear them out. And it was a great experience for us. I think it was for them as well. And I think overwhelmingly they liked what we proposed. And from that meeting, we went back to staff, showed it to staff. Staff had a couple concerns about what we'd proposed, so we actually made some changes after we met with staff. We then went back to the neighbors again and showed the changes, and they seemed supportive of it as well. And so here we are back before the Landmark Commission and hoping that you guys will see the value in our efforts in meeting with neighbors and seeing the results of what collaboration between staff and neighbor and developers can achieve. So that's our presentation tonight. And we're here to answer any questions.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant?
I'll start with a
Charles,
couple.
please go.
These are individual homes that will be sold individually, is that correct? Or,
Yeah.
Or depends on who buys them, but
Yeah,
they
they're
are.
design they're fee simple. They're twin homes, so there's 10 buildings. Excuse me, 5 buildings, 10 units.
Okay.
Sold individually. Yeah.
And you'll be, as part of your development, will you be doing all the landscaping across the face of them?
Yeah.
But then, once there's individual owners, they will have the ability, it won't be a condo situation, they'll be able to modify, adapt their front yard the way they choose
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Exactly.
David? Victoria? Nothing? Esther? Paul? Robert?
I'm curious what you're going to do in the backyards. Are you landscaping them before you sell them? Are you going all the way to the Victory Road?
That's a great question. Let me get back to the site plan so you can kind of get an understanding of the depth of what is really there.
The big backyard.
They're big backyards.
long.
And long. So you can see that there's actually a retaining wall back behind some of these units that acts kind of as a natural break between the area where we'll landscape and the area where we'll just revegetate, if needed, existing, grasses and native grasses. So no, they're too big and it's too steep. It's not really functional to landscape all that.
Sure.
The retaining walls, and I suppose you would introduce that long serpentine retaining wall to lower the elevation so you have less height challenges with the property. And realize that that's been greatly reduced. See that from your presentation.
Yeah.
The amount of area that now you have just 1 or 2, maybe 3 small locations that are slightly over allowed heights, but it's really minor in comparison.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing I noticed, in the effort to separate the buildings and to turn them slightly, there are fewer retaining walls between the buildings, between the developed buildings, which I think is a plus.
Yeah.
I'd encourage variation in those, variations in plantings and things like that. That's all positives, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
That wasn't a question, that was a statement, sorry.
Yeah,
But-
no, thank you. I'm glad you noticed it. We actually made changes to the walls. We made them smaller. We tiered them as they come down to the front of the buildings so that there's more elevation, more landscaping and green between the walls. So thank you for noticing that.
This is not really historical in nature, but will you be putting a new sewer line in the street? Is the city requiring that?
They usually do, it seems like, no matter
Because
what we do.
the sewer doesn't run down
If
at
there's
the
a
street.
utility that needs, that
opportunity.
they want,
Yeah.
then we usually get it. So
Uh-huh.
I think, I believe there is a new sewer. This includes widening the existing road.
Yeah.
It includes curb and gutter and sidewalk on the east side of the street. And I've been focusing on elevation stuff, but I'm pretty certain it is a new sewer, maybe a new water. It also includes a turnaround for fire. As far as public services are concerned, fire has been a very real concern on this street over this last summer. There were 2 significant fires that affected this area. And as of now, there's no turnaround for fire on this road. It's very narrow. There's not even a hammerhead for them to do so. And our development provides a hammerhead at the end so that fire trucks can turn around safely.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioners, any other questions for the applicant? If not, thank you very much. We will open it up to public comment.
Thank you.
And we have 2 cards. First would be Randall McNair. Next will be Minta Brandon. We'll have about 2 minutes each for comments. So, Randall McNair, please come forward.
I wasn't invited to this meeting.
Can
Okay.
if you have a public comment, please come up to the table.
He just has card information.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Record voices from the audience, so if you have something to say, submit a card and your name will get called and you can come up and share what you'd like to say, or if you'd rather they read the comment card, you can have that happen as well.
And is there a Minta Brandon who would like to come forward and speak, please? Please make sure you speak into the microphone and give your name and address.
Yeah, I'm Minta Brandon. This is my 50th year of having to do with you people to keep my area Marmalade District. I'm a board member of the Capitol Hill Community Council. I've been there 49 years. These pictures look perfect to everybody. And I'm sure you've all went up and seen the grounds. Is that a fact? You've all went and seen what the land looks like? Do you visualize how much money it's going to cost to flatten that ground and let the other people have light? On the other side of West Capitol, they won't see light till the sun goes down. They have this plan of a turnaround for a fire truck. Well, wonder if the fire truck can't get to the turnaround to get there. That's insane. I have a nephew that's a fireman for our neighborhood. I could have him come and talk. But you've got to look, just realize a big truck and everybody coming and they pull into this place and they bow out. And pull. What's going on between? And also, the design. I know that this is a preservation board. I helped make this historical board. I was proud of it. People built to be like us. Because what was so nice about our area, you can't find one house that's identical. You know why? Because they were pioneers. And they were individualists. They had their idea of what was beautiful and wasn't. Now, you guys, pardon me, I call guys, I'm a great-grandmother, what do you expect? Variances. They want these variances, like right next door to me, and a former member of the board, Mary Pinkerton, or close to that name, assured me that my neighbor would level the ground and put a garage just like her house. Well, Mary transferred to county, and I believed her. Now you come to my house and you step out the door, you can't see to the left side because There's really a mini Taj Mahal garage, and you can barely see the house. And right now, we're under siege for the last 2 years, sinkholes. The whole street, West Capitol, we had no water yesterday. So all this, I know you're trying to cut time, I understand, but you got to see, it's a way of life up there. That's why people like it there. That's why I've been there 55 years, raised all my children. Everybody up there has been there for years. For why? Because of it.
Okay.
Because what it represented. We were a part of the original group. And now you guys are going to give variances, like with my neighbor got a variance for her garage.
Okay.
It's taller than any house
Could I
on
ask you
the
to
block.
please wrap up your comments?
Yes, I will. I expect you to do as being the save at historic buildings. I think you should start thinking of design. You say that, well, we can't make it, they can't make it. Well, Bennett across the street, he did his. He's had his built. It looks historic to us. These don't. They don't appeal to, and is it going to bring our property value down, or everybody thinks it's going to bring it up?
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate your comments.
Frank, it's your turn.
All right. Would that appears to be the end of the public comment cards. Would the applicant like to return? Thank you. Okay. The public hearing is now closed. Would the applicant like to return for a moment to respond to any comments? I can take that.
Jacob Ballstead with Garbett Homes. I appreciate the comments. I want to be sensitive. Through this process, I think we've tried to be sensitive to the historic nature of this area. And a lot of that has to do with the street and the houses that have been there and this property that's been there for so long. I think change is difficult. And part of what we're proposing will affect the neighbors and will be different. And so we've tried to be sensitive to that. And one of those issues that has come up that has to do with building heights. There was a previous proposal for this property that was actually approved by the Historic Landmark Commission well before we were involved. It included buildings that extended up onto the flat area of the up the hill. As we evaluated things, we looked at another plan that showed buildings up on the hill, both of which we abandoned. They would have had significantly more impacts. They would have been much higher on the hill and would have been blocked the sunlight in the morning for the neighbors on the west side of the street. And given the situation of this property and the natural constraints that are there, this is really the lowest impact way to develop the property. And I would say we are asking for some exceptions as it relates to building heights. The images below help illustrate what we're requesting. And this is actually improved from our first proposal. I believe the image on the bottom left illustrates the request for above what's currently in the code. And if you take the average height of the buildings on the block face, what we're asking for an exception on is the image on the bottom right. So literally, there's a couple of feet, a couple of square feet on one of the buildings that is minutely above the average building height of the structures on the block face. So I think the requests that we're making are minor, and the overall development, I think, takes into consideration some concerns and is developing it the best way possible as it relates to heights and structures and concerns that way. So.
Any last questions for the applicant?
I have a simple one. One of the questions was about the fire truck turnaround,
Yeah.
which I see is about 3/4 of the way up the project. Obviously, well, I presume, will that be signed and monitored? I mean, how does it not become a parking stall?
Yeah, so we'll put up signage just saying it's for a fire truck turnaround. We'll paint curbs and things of that nature, and do all we can to make sure that it's that you don't park there. So, but it meets the regulations. We met with Ted and designed it to meet what he specified. So it'll fully function as a code fire turnaround.
And so does that actually remain parts of 2 lots?
Yes. Well, that's a good question. Will it be a separate lot?
Or would it be dedicated to the city?
I think we'd be happy to do whichever. Maybe we'd dedicate it, actually. I haven't thought down that road very far. If we did dedicate it to the city, I'm assuming the city would be able to ticket it if anybody to park there and such. So maybe that would be the best path.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
At this point, we will close the public hearing and go into executive session where the commission can discuss this application. Paul, do you have anything you'd like to say on this one?
Well, I think it's just worth pointing out that the process seems like it's worked really, really well. I appreciate the developer for engaging with the neighborhood as much as they did, and frankly just listening as closely as they clearly have. I think Jacob encapsulated all the feedback that we gave in the initial hearing really well, and I think it was a great showing on the neighborhood's part too to engage with the developer in a really positive, constructive way. So hats off to everybody on this one. I think it's a much better project than it was, and I'm looking forward to seeing it go up.
Esther, any thoughts?
Not necessarily. I wasn't here on the March meeting, but what I see so far, it seems like the applicant has definitely taken their time to take into account the area, the public's comment, and also the changes that you've made. Seems like you're definitely aware of what the concerns are. And just looking at this page, this one, I mean, they're going into so much detail here in addressing the height issues, and just letting us see it, because a lot of times I don't think we get to see the facade the way that I'm more visual. I need to see things, and this is very helpful for me. So.
Thank you. Robert, comments?
No, I like it. It's good use of a difficult piece of property. You know, the concerns that I've read about and seen pertain to the classic American development issue of whoever goes last gets the most feedback from everybody. But you know what? They have a right to develop their land, and as long as they comply with the zoning code, which they're doing, there's the variances I would call immaterial. And I think it's an excellent, much improved plan over the prior one. I like it.
Victoria?
I certainly empathize with the comments we heard, and I don't think it's practical that this land will go undeveloped. And I think this is a really responsible way to honor the ethos of the neighborhood and the topography that they're working with. And it's so much better than March.
David, you good? Charles?
Nothing in addition, I don't think. Just encouraging them to, I think the variation that they've added since the March meeting, I think it goes a long ways to helping it be more responsive to the neighborhood, and I encourage that to continue. Hope that will continue as it develops.
Okay. David, you pulled the microphone as if you were
ready to go.
Were you okay? Let's go for a motion.
Okay, based on the analysis and findings in the staff report, standards approval for the proposed special exceptions have been substantially met. Testimony and the proposal presented, I move that the commission approve the request for 2 special exceptions located at approximately 690 North West.
Both at the same time?
I can do them both at the same time, okay?
I think so.
Also move to approve, also, based on the analysis of findings in the staff report, the standards for approval of a certificate of appropriateness involving new construction in a local historic district have been substantially met. Testimony and the proposal presented. I move that the commission approve the request for new construction located at approximately 690 Northwest Capitol Street, subject to conditions as listed in the staff report.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll take a vote, starting with Paul.
Aye.
Aye.
Shepherd, aye.
Richardson, aye.
Petro Eschler, aye.
Stoll, aye.
Motion is unanimous. The application passes.
Oh, yeah, do you want to read?
Oh, yes, the blurb. Appeal of Historic Landmark Commission decision. Anyone aggrieved by the Historic Landmark Commission's decision may object to the decision by filing a written appeal with the appeals hearing officer within 10 calendar days following the date on which a record of decision is issued. The applicant may object to the decision of the Historic Landmark Commission by filing a written appeal. Nope, I don't need to read that second one. So the first part. If you're aggrieved, you may file an appeal. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda. Construction of hotel building, major addition to Salt Lake Union Pacific Railroad Station, and demolition of non-contributing structures at approximately 2nd South and 400 West. Oh, the applicant. Okay, got it, I guess. Okay, thanks. All right.
Thank you,
We'll
Chair.
start with staff to present the project.
Hello and good evening. Project before you at the moment is a new hotel building centered on the Union Pacific Station, which is city landmark building. A reminder of the location, 400 West, the top northeast corner of the Gateway development. A view of the existing station building with parts of the Gateway behind. Summarizing the current hotel proposals, the hotel will use part of the station building, excluding the northern wing, and a new building which would be built on the west side, slightly detached from the station building. It would use the Grand Station Hall and the east range of rooms of the existing Union Pacific Station, and the south wing of that station building, 3 floors of that wing. The new hotel building behind will be 8 stories in crescent form. The 2 buildings are linked by single-story additions running between the 2. And also by higher level bridge links at either end of the new building. There's a public space and the east and west access between the station and the plaza and the gateway are retained in this proposal. The proposal overall is estimated at somewhere between 210, 225 hotel room keys plus hotel amenities. Briefly looking at the historic station building, this was constructed in 1908, 1909. It was built for the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad and the Oregon Short Line, providing a new Los Angeles rail service at that point in time, reducing the journey time by approximately 400 miles. It has been a Salt Lake City landmark building since 1972. It has been on the National Register of Historic Places since 1975. French Renaissance in style, It was Salt Lake's premier passenger rail station until approximately 1986. It's constructed in reinforced concrete and clad in buff gray sandstone and red brick. The original slate roof is now clad in copper. Current use of the station building is actually a music venue in the northern wing. That would stay. That's not part of the hotel proposal. And on the south wing, offices and exhibition space, which I believe has just been vacated. The Grand Hall itself is open to the public certain hours of the day. There is a public access easement through that area, and is used for occasional function use where it tends to be closed. One of the application renderings here showing the proposed new hotel building behind the existing station building from an elevated viewpoint in front of the arena to the southeast. And then a view from the west of the new hotel building as would enclose that side of the public plaza and the gateway. The proposed new hotel building in the context of the existing station building. And again, a historic rendering of the station and the western facade of the new building as currently proposed. This plan actually is useful because it indicates the degree to which the proposal sits within the footprint of the existing building and its rear additions. Those are defined here in this plan. You will note that the new hotel building actually steps in from the ends, south and north end of the station building. And then looking at this site plan, this plan actually defines some of the public easements which actually run through the station building from the east. Include the Grand Hall through the plaza behind to give access to the Gateway Plaza to the west. It shows you also the new hotel building and the relationship with the roof profile of the existing station building. Breakdown of the proposed use of the buildings, that both new and within the existing station. The applicant will be going into this in greater detail, I think, shortly. Public way through between the station Grand Hall and the plaza behind. You can see in the center of that. And then rising up through the building, this would represent the, I think, the second floor, upper level of the Grand Hall, hotel suites in the south wing, and then hotel function spaces, including a specialty bar on the east side of the station building, and then the bridge links through to the new hotel building behind. Rising up again, showing the relationship of the two, and the roof profile of the existing station. Proposed elevations of the new hotel building, both west and east, and then north and south. Representative section through both buildings and showing you some of the relationship really between the two. And then a representative detailed section of the facade and the way the materials are actually used across those floors. You will have a lot more detail on that within your staff report, and the applicant will be speaking to that further. Representative sections through the new building, and representative details of the new building. Proposed materials primarily a buff gray brick matching the sandstone of the west facade of the station building. That will be the primary material for the new hotel building. And then secondarily, there is a limestone cladding on the first level, the ground level of the new hotel building. There is also bronze and some woodwork as well in terms of cladding. Perspective of what the building will look like approaching it from the gateway itself and the public space down there. Reminder of the station building and its context. Faces South Temple, iconic view within Salt Lake City. The station forms the focal point of that view from some distance east. It forms the northeast corner of the gateway development and is the historic counterpoint to the arena across the street to the southeast. The railroad echo is picked up again by the Rio Grande Depot to the south. Its front facade facing 400 West, rear facade overlooks the Olympic Legacy Plaza and Rio Grande Street. And substantial gateway buildings to the west and the south. The site is currently well served by TRAX lines. There are public access easements for the station and also the Gateway Plaza. Briefly canter through a series of views here, going around the site, approaching the site in its context from the south on 400 West. That's an elevated view across from the forecourt of the arena across the street. Semi-elevated view. The view from South Temple and the TRAX station at that point. And then moving further north, looking back towards station building, going south around the northern end, northern facade. Moving around to the rear, the west side of the station building, the proposed hotel would sit in this location. The gantries you see in terms of fire escapes, or fire escape in this case, would be removed as part of that, as would the single-story additions. Those would be rebuilt. The service area to the immediate left of this photograph would remain for the use of the hotel. Walking along at walkway level here, that way through will remain. That's part of a public access easement around the building. You can see the station building to the immediate left. The vegetation on the left here largely defines the line of the new hotel building. The hotel building really doesn't encroach beyond that. The view from the west across the Legacy Plaza and further west. And then moving south along Rio Grande Street. At higher level, approaching back to the building. Through the gateway, building starts to reappear. These views would go, I think, with this particular proposal. And then approaching the rear again. The south gantry fire escape, that would be removed, and the south facade of the station building, just by way of information. That would become part of the hotel. Along the south wing, back towards the central part of the station building. And I know everybody's really wondering what's above the Grand Hall in that huge void, right? So was I. So we actually have a photograph for you. It's largely empty with a lot of air conditioning equipment. And the applicant may well wish to address this, but I think one of the intents here is to, inside the Grand Hall, there are several roof lights, not skylights, but roof lights within that particular hall. Those were previously lit from the top of this mansard roof. One consideration is that they may be artificially lit, I think, when this proposal goes through. You can see the top of one of those lights in the foreground of that photograph on the left, where they've been overclad with plywood and various other things. Okay, summarizing the impact of the proposal. On the Union Pacific Station building, the proposal really does not anticipate major alteration to that building. The gantries, fire escapes would be removed. Minimal alteration to any of the historic aspects of the station building. Public access easements would remain in place. Within the context, the proposal really actually sits within the footprint of the existing building and its rear single-story additions. The new building would step in from the length of the Union Station building at either end. The rear additions, obviously single-story additions to the rear of the station would go in this proposal. A new single-story accommodation would be built there. The open court between the station would continue below the new building. That would be retained and reformed. The new building is actually effectively detached from the original station. There are a couple of upper-level bridge links at either end, but one would sit apart from the other and then linked again at ground level. Summarizing height, width, scale, and massing, the proposed new building would be higher than the station wings but lower than the maximum height of the central part of the station. Again, stepping in from the length of the station, because of its crescent shape form, the massing of the proposal in terms of the new building actually would step back, sweeping back from the station building, creating that central courtyard space. And the scale is relatively relates to both station and the gateway building, some of which are higher, some of which are lower. It's lower than the maximum height of the station building. In relation to design and materials, the concave east facade is demonstrated and framed by two specific wings, which are more solid in design and materials. Convex west wing presents a serrated fenestration, strong vertical emphasis with a central entrance accent. The ground floor and the top floors are taller in stature, defining the building as base, middle, and top, effectively. And the materials appear to relate relatively well to both the station and the gateway. Dealing briefly with city's master plans, the primary plans here, the earlier ones, include the urban design element, gateway land use and development plan, and specific plans of 1998, Central Community Master Plan, and then they are all updated effectively by the Downtown Plan 2016. This proposal has three separate working parts to it. This is the Certificate of Appropriateness application you're reviewing this evening. There is also a planned development application and a conditional building and site design review application, both of which will be reviewed by the Planning Commission. Planning Commission held a work session on those two applications on October the 10th, and it will come back before the Planning Commission on November the 14th for review. Briefly, in relation to public commentary received to date, Planning Department held a public open house on September the 19th. Response there from the public was generally positive. Those comments received that evening are included in your report in Attachment E. We have had several additional comments since, 3 phone inquiries for additional information and 3 email comments, and then since I wrote this one, we had 3 additional letters of support coming through. All of that material will have been forwarded to you. Hopefully you should be aware of that and those comments received. The design evaluation of the building in greater detail, you will find in attachment D of the staff report. And the staff report summarizes perhaps 4 key considerations here. One is the Union Pacific Railroad Station and its historic integrity. This proposal seems to safeguard most, if not all, aspects of that. This recommendation before you this evening actually has a condition attached to it to keep a closer eye on the approval of finer details as far as that side of the proposal is concerned. The immediate station setting and associated public realm, all of that largely remains. The proposed new building sits within the existing footprint. The rebuild, the single-story additions, retains the sort of the public courtway through, an access way through from the station to the plaza behind, the west. The design of the new hotel building considered in a fair degree of detail, and both the distinct facades are differentiated in terms of design, detail, and to an extent materials. And then finally, a further thought in terms of the potential impact of the proposals upon the Union Pacific Station and the Gateway, in terms of their regenerative impact from an economic, social, cultural, and historic point of view. Now, I'll briefly read through the recommendation, and then I have 1 or 2 further brief comments to make on the potential motion. The recommendation before you this evening reads, based on the analysis and findings listed in the staff report, staff recommends the Historic Landmark Commission approve the application PLN HLC 2018-00616, construction of hotel building, major additions to the Salt Lake Union Pacific Railroad Station, and demolition of non-contributing structures at approximately 2 South, 400 West, with the following conditions. 1, that approval of details of alterations to the Union Pacific Station building is delegated to staff. 2, that approval of details of the design of the new hotel building and associated landscaping is delegated to staff. Before we leave this, I would like to add a brief comment following some information from our attorneys who were looking at the public easements which pertain to this particular site. And I've just pasted together comments primarily from Paul. It does not appear that the hotel plans violate the terms of the easement because the hotel respects public walkway and also keeps the depot lobby open to the public. It would be helpful to make sure that information is in the record at the HLC meeting tonight and potentially include language in a motion requiring that the site plans going forward to continue to identify the location of the easements to ensure the easements are respected. I'm open to anything else you might wish to add to that, Paul, but we're hoping to add that to the motion this evening as part of the record.
Just as long as the building is respecting those easements, then and not encroaching into them, then it's not a problem. It's not 100% clear to me where those lines may be, but if there is encroachment into the easements, then those will have to be renegotiated with the city.
Understood. And I know the applicant is aware of voiced concerns in relation to the easements, and I will assume that they will want to address that as well this evening.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to let the commission know that we received a letter from Fair Park Community Council just a few moments ago, and I have put it in the Dropbox. A letter of support. So if you'd like to take a look, commissioners. From Fair Park Community Council. Thanks.
And that would conclude my presentation. Happy to answer any questions at this point.
Commissioners, questions for,
I've got
please?
some. Carl, if I can kind of continue on the easement. And excuse me, I was unaware of anything about that before the email that we received today, the email comments from Roger Borgnick. And it's only from his email, and that's all I understand about it. It sounds like there's the two parts to the easement that he talks about, one being the access through the hall, and then, as he calls it in his second paragraph, a public use and view easement for the plaza area west of the depot. And then, I don't know, this may be more of his interpretation, and I don't know what the document states, but about this visibility of the west elevation of the building. And I don't understand that, but I'm just wondering if you and Paul have any insight on that component of it.
So Katie Lewis in my office represents the RDA, and she was looking into some of these easement issues. I'm not entirely familiar with the history of this. I did take a brief look at one of the easements that was pointed out. I didn't notice anything with respect to a view easement. That's not to say it's not in there. I may need to go back and huddle with Katie and make sure that that's not part of this.
Yeah, I did see a document that looked like the actual easement, and it did specifically address the view issue. So we're going to have to make sure that becomes part of this.
Right.
I wonder if I could, do you mind if I interject?
Question.
Maybe this is for our executive session, or is this a question for?
I guess if we're talking with staff.
Okay.
I have really significant concerns about talking about this easement in this context. For one thing, and far as aside from it sounds like Kent, none of us have seen it. Right. Interpreting an easement can turn on a single word.
Correct.
And it's totally outside, at least I think, the purview of our design standards and the design guidelines.
I would agree with that.
So I would make a suggestion anyway that there is I'm sure there is a venue for that easement to be enforced. I don't even know who the parties to the easement are, but somebody's got a right to enforce it, I would assume. But I don't think it's us.
And I agree with that. That's the kind of thing that should be enforced or dealt with, however, at the building permit stage. I think it's presented right now for informational purposes, just so that you're aware of it, and perhaps more to highlight for the applicant that it might be an issue that they're going to have to deal with.
I disagree, though, because if it addresses view in the easement, that would seem to me to have a design response. If they're, and we don't know how the easement is exactly written or what the legal parameters are, but if it is view through the building, is it view from within the building to outside the building? That clearly falls into a design element, in my opinion.
I think I don't disagree with that, but I think the way I would envision the process working is that were this design determined down the road to not comply with the easement, the applicant would need to address that and come back. But I really can't imagine that we're going to serve as judge and jury here on how the easement is to be interpreted.
I agree with that. Because of whatever the specific terms of that easement are, the applicant should at this point be very aware that that may present an obstacle to their path forward. Where I agree with you that design and view are somewhat married. It's complicated at this point to have the commission trying to figure out whether that easement would be a bar to the development. So,
Well, I wouldn't.
I think that if there's an action taken tonight, that there may be room for something to be subject to something.
That would make sense. I'd like to expand my opinion beyond just view. If there is a public access element to this, are there defined dimensions of this public access? Is the public allowed to walk down a 3-foot wide strip through the middle of the building, or is it the complete hall? You know, so I think
if I can address that, yes. The easements, as far as I'm aware, and I haven't gone through them from a legal perspective, but the easements appear to include the access through to the Grand Hall from the west side of the building. So that is public easement space, including the Grand Hall.
Okay.
And then from the Grand Hall through to the courtyard behind, and then through the courtyard behind to the Gateway Plaza and across the Gateway Plaza. There are 2 separate easements, one amendment of the plaza easement from much later on. I didn't, from my perspective, I didn't see any reference to specific view references in that. They are mainly public access easements, and there's a no-bill line that is currently defined by the public ways around the building, which will be retained with this proposal, as will the courtyard through the building, from the station through to the plaza to the west.
Okay.
I hope that helps a little bit.
That does help.
If you look at in the material as part of your staff report, the site plan there in terms of the application drawings actually starts to fairly effectively defines those areas in terms of the 2 access easement areas and the no-build easement lines.
Okay. Right. Other questions for staff?
I have another one.
Go ahead, Jim.
This is from big to small, and I'm sure the applicant will talk about it, but I don't think I remember seeing it in your presentation. There was some discussion, this is on page 62 of their document, but about canopy concept design options at the south wing. And there were 3 options that they presented, and I don't remember anything in your staff report addressing those, and I don't know if you have some
I
comments.
did not. Yes, I did not address those, and in fact, there are open questions in relation to signage as well. I think the applicant will clarify, but I think the applicant's intent is to engage the commission for the commission's views in terms of what future forms, future canopies might take, and also future signage. And just in relation to the signage side of things, part of that may well include confirmation of the public access easement nature of the spaces, potentially. I think the applicant wants to address that in greater detail, though.
Is that all for Carl? Right. Thank you, Carl. Nice presentation as usual. Would the applicant please come forward?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present our project to you tonight. Carl did an excellent job going through a lot of the material. I'd like to introduce our team. First off, my name is Jeff Mongan. I'm a partner with the Athens Group. We're a hotel development company working with Vestar on this project, and we've been working on it for well over a year now. So what you'll see tonight is the result of quite a bit of effort. My colleague Mark Sanford's in the row right behind me. He's our head of development and one of our project managers, and Amir Tursik with HKS Architects. Our overall objective is to build a new upscale boutique hotel as an anchor amenity for the Gateway, which has gone through some challenging times, but Vestar is in the process of revitalizing the center, and this is an important element of Vestar's overall plan to reposition the center. There's some excellent examples around the country of these adaptive reuse of train station hotels, and we'll include some of that information in the presentation tonight. But what really has us excited is the opportunity to do something unique like that that could be a great addition to the tourism and amenity base downtown. And also, I will say, for 3 decades now, over 3 decades, we've worked with HKS on projects around the country, and each one of those hotel properties has become a real community asset and a gathering place. I know there was some concern about that somehow this was not going to be a gathering place, but our whole plan here is to revitalize this and really make it a great place for the community to come and participate in. We also have a lot of information about those easements and be happy to address some of the comments that were made about the easements earlier as well after Amir finishes. So Amir, please present the project.
Sorry, I'm not really familiar with the Mac.
Oh, getting his... Well, while he's doing that, let me just address the comments about the easements. It is a bit confusing. There are multiple easements. There is a depot pedestrian access easement that goes through the building and incorporates all of the grand hall, and then it becomes narrower as it goes out through the courtyard and heads out to the plaza. And then separately, there is a plaza easement, which encompasses the Gateway Plaza down below at the lower level on both sides of Rio Grande. And that public plaza easement also has a view easement. So the idea is that there won't be any buildings built within that easement area down in the plaza. But there are no view easements that go through the depot parcel. So, and we'd be happy to have legal counsel collaborate with counsel for the city and the RDA on that topic.
Good evening. Sorry about the delay. As Jeff mentioned, we worked on this project for over a year now. Carl did a really good job of summarizing it. So hopefully we'll really focus on our design intent and things that are hard to see in the amount of information we provided today. We did start the project by really doing some research on the building to better understand the history of the building, its evolution, its symbolic and historic significance. We found a wonderful collection of images. This is the oldest image we could find from 1907, which is a little strange because all the records indicate that the building was built between 1908 and 1909, so go figure. But what the building does show, you can see that this is a concrete frame building, which was pretty impressive for a building that was built 100 years ago. It was also built on piers, which is very advanced. Here's the photograph from 1909, shortly before its completion. You can see the materials of the building. The building was constructed of regional materials. The base stone came actually from Wyoming, and the red pressed brick is from Salt Lake City. You can also see the original slate shingle on the roof that later down the road was replaced. Here's another image probably just before the completion of the building where you can see the original name of the building, Union Station. That will change over time as well. Here's one of the few photographs that we found of the terminal rear side of the building, probably shortly before the completion as well, based on some of the construction workers you're seeing. But it becomes pretty apparent that in terms of the architectural articulation, there's a significant difference between the east and the west facade. One of our favorite photographs that actually has become kind of an inspirational image that's been driving really our design concept is the Grand Hall itself. Pretty powerful image, and even though it's the Grand Hall has been very well preserved over time, there's a significant difference between it today and what it used to look like, just how it was filled with light and energy. Obviously, there's any people in this building, but there's a lot of original ceiling stenciling, and Carl talked about the atria and these round windows that actually connected to the second level that have been lost over time. We extensively studied the style, architectural style as well, and some of its obviously the mansard roof that Carl talked about with the dormer windows. You can see how that pavilion was intentionally differentiated from the wings of the building, which was pretty typical for that style. And the proportions of the pavilion are exaggerated in comparison to the rest of the building. We mentioned that because it's something that we actually start picking up on in our design, but in a more abstract and conceptual way rather than trying to replicate in a historic building. Here's some additional drawings. And then, as we mentioned, the building evolved over time, obviously 100-year-old building. So we kind of created a timeline of images, a few of them that we could find. This is a picture after the building was completed in 1912. The reason we know that that's one of the oldest pictures is because it still has the original clock tower as well as the cast iron balustrade at the very top that you'll see removed in these photographs right here. The clock was removed after Union Pacific became the full owner of the building, and they obviously replaced their sign really quickly. As Carl mentioned, the building continued to be operational as a depot until about in the 80s, and then it was replaced by Rio Grande just 3 blocks to the south. But what's worth noting is that there was a significant remodel in the 70s because the building was significantly damaged that you can see here replaced the original slate shingle roof with the copper standing seam metal roof. And then obviously the latest significant remodel happened as a part of the Gateway development in the 90s. I think Carl covered it very well, but we understand that the north wing of the building is used as a nightclub or event avenue. The retail buildings that were added to the back and connected physically to the station itself. The delicate egress stairs that were added, as well as the dormer windows at the top that were actually not original to the building. And then we took some photographs of this is at the bottom photograph shows what the north wing looks today. You can see that they actually removed a large portion of the second floor to create a nightclub and a mezzanine level. The photograph at the top is actually the center pavilion on the second level. There used to be a big bar that is no longer used by the depot. And then the north wing of the building is used today as an office space. It was completely regutted and remodeled, and there's very little historic significance to the interior finishes that are there today. And then obviously we get back to the Grand Hall, which is kind of the centerpiece of this entire project. As you can see, it's been very well preserved over time. There was a public easement that we already discussed to a great extent that was placed as a part of the Gateway development, allowing public to access through the hall. Unfortunately, with the decline of retail at the Gateway, the space has become abandoned with a few bypassers, and occasionally it can be rented out as an event venue, which does happen occasionally, but not very often. And in that sense, the space itself, it's losing its importance and vitality. Here's some photographs of the details that are still very well preserved. But more beyond than just the physical building itself, we came across a variety of images that we feel are really important for us to share because they are really driving our design. And it's really obviously there is a big historic significance behind the railroad ring and the station and Salt Lake City becoming a transportation center and economic impact and all of that. But the station itself actually was more than that. It was a very dynamic place where people used to gather and kind of celebrate the idea of travel the way we don't use it anymore. And we really hope to revoke some of this as much as we can, if not all of it, with our building by introducing a function that would give the building its vitality and really create another opportunity for people that come to visit Salt Lake City, see the station, see the great heritage of Salt Lake City that could be celebrated with them. So architecturally speaking, our goal is really to reinvigorate the character and the spirit and the vitality of the station itself and the Grand Hall in particular. We have no desire to demolish any of the historic elements. As you can see, we've done a great amount of research to understand what's truly historic, what it's not, and how can we really find that spirit and really reinvigorate the original character of the space itself. We looked at a variety of precedents, as Jeff alluded to. There's probably about a handful, if not more, of former station buildings that have been converted to the hotels. One of them is the Crawford Hotel in Denver, which actually now acts again as a train station after they re-established the train link between the airport and downtown. So that's a major difference. But one thing that they've done really well is the way they activated that whole space. You can see a variety of retail, commercial, and food and beverage outlets. You can see how they repurposed the former terminal ticket office to a terminal bar. They preserved a lot of the original architecture. What's also neat about this project is because of its location downtown, which is very similar to ours, this is not just a place where you see people that travel by train or stay at a hotel. It's actually a very popular place where local people hang out and go to as a destination, which is very much what we're trying to achieve with our project. Another project that perhaps is in scale and level of intimacy is much closer to ours is the St. Louis Hilton Hotel. And this is another example of a former station which you can see they used as a lobby lounge. And I think that this is probably a much closer image to what we're trying to achieve. If you can imagine kind of reopening and reconnecting the station with the depot to the left and the new restaurants and the courtyard in Fort South, and really allowing it to kind of become a public space. We're not trying to exclude public out of it. That space also functions as an event venue. So it has that flexibility, but we also liked how they're using lighting to kind of set different modes and moods for the building without really compromising the historic integrity of the building itself. And this is something that's pretty common to all these stations that we've studied. So we're going to talk a little bit about our intent and how we intend to reactivate the Grand Hall. And there's really 2 or 3 major components to it. One is how we program the spaces around it, right? We know that there is an existing pretty successful event venue on the 2nd floor in the North Wing. There's an existing retail restaurant that is currently vacant but will be occupied in the near future. So we really like the idea of kind of activating the space by introducing new food and beverage, retail, lobby bar, and other hotel functions that all connect to the Grand Hall, similarly that you've seen in those photographs. We also feel that it's very important that we establish connectivity between the Grand Hall and the rest of the spaces and make it more permeable the way it used to be, the way you've seen it in the case of the Denver project. And we just wanted to show one quick example of the pictures we found. This little retail stand is actually, I can't point to it, but if you look to the left, there used to be a little newsstand. There was just a little nook where now they have a new stair. But this is kind of what we're trying to do. There is a lot of opportunities. You can see that today, even though we think of the station as very well preserved, and it is, but there's a lot of areas that have been walled off, like that little nook that we talked about, or the arched windows to the right they used to connect to the 2nd floor. So, and then a lot of obviously non-historic doors that have been added and created a kind of a vacuum, architecturally speaking, that we would love to reintroduce. And the reason we're getting into this much detail is this is the extent of renovation or alteration to the existing building that we intend to do. We really want to just recreate the original spirit and remove some of the non-historic elements that have been added since. In terms of the architectural design, I think that, again, Carl covered this very quickly, but we'll just add a few more things. This is the aerial photograph of the station and the retail buildings to the left. Obviously, the station is located along the South Temple axis and right across the street from track stop. Our response, architecturally speaking, is a curvilinear building form that does a few things for us. One, it separates itself from the station as much as it can, allowing it to maintain its integrity. And 2, the curvilinear form really responds to the rest of the Gateway. While Gateway may not be a historic district, it's a very eclectic place, and it does deserve some of the attention, and we're trying to really improve both. Here's the site plan that Carl has already presented. We'd like to point out that the distance between the new building and the existing building as its closest location is 17.5 feet. And its widest location right in the courtyard, it's over 42 feet. The 2 buildings would be connected with a single-story building that we call a connector to be very sensitive, and we would reutilize the existing openings in the west wall so that we're not compromising the structural integrity of the building. Carl has walked us through the plans, but one thing we'd like to point out that the Gateway infrastructure already connects us to an existing loading dock. With this service tunnel that's already there. There's already a heating and cooling, district heating and cooling that we would connect to. There's a lot of infrastructure that's already in place that we don't have to worry about or how it's going to interface with the new station. I'm going to go through these really quickly because they were already covered. I'd like to point out that we would actually enclose the egress stairs for the station within our building so that they would no longer be visible. The only thing that would be visible would be these delicate bridges. Carl already talked about the building height and how it relates to the historic building, but one thing we'd like to reinforce is this relative to the easement and public access. I think that this building section or perspective really shows our intent of how we intend to reinforce the connection between Fort West with retail, the Grand Station kind of as the center piece of the entire project, and then a more intimate courtyard that also will be programmed and activated, and finally the connection to the plaza itself. Our building would be approximately 95 feet tall, which stays below the mansard roof. For comparison purposes, the building to the north of us, the Fidelity building, is 131 feet tall. So in terms of the scale itself of the hotel, while we're trying to keep it as low as we can while satisfying the density of the project, it is very compatible with the rest of the Gateway office buildings, which vary somewhere between 7, 8, and in this case, probably 10 plus stories. Architecturally, this was a challenging project, to say the least. On one hand, you have a historic, 100-year historic building that a lot of people have a personal connection to, and rightfully so. On the other hand, we're facing a very eclectic, more recent development that was built about 20 years ago. But we have 4 bullet points that hopefully will summarize our intent. One was that always to be sensitive to the historic building, while at the same time being complementary to the Gateway context, that our architectural articulation would be restrained and focused on detail and simplicity so that we're not competing with the historic landmark, that we would relate to the historic building and reinterpret some of its elements, but through a stylistically clearly distinguishable contemporary design. We're not trying to recreate a 100-year-old design. For those of you that practice architecture, you know that that's impossible. We don't have the materials, we don't have the craftsmanship, and a lot of times when you try to do that, you actually disrespect the historic building. And last but not least is that we do intend to include historic references of the existing building and its use through branding, signage, art, and things of that nature. Looking at the building from South Temple, we'd like to kind of just emphasize its subordinate nature. It's a very subtle design that just creates a backdrop for the historic building without trying to compete with it. We also broke down the scale of the backdrop by using a different texture brick, by reorienting the brick, and again, that's playing with the brickwork. It's another way we're nodding to the elaborate brickwork that's on the existing building without necessarily trying to copy it. This is the view of the courtyard, which some of you that visited have seen today, which is more or less just a pass-through space. We're really trying to create a place that people want to come to and have a reason to stay. So the way we activate and program the space, you can see on the left that there would be some kind of a coffee or retail space that could be called the Rail Yard Coffee, just to reference the historic use of the building. On the other side, we have meeting room spaces. You start to get a sense of how deeply recessed the windows are, which is something that the historic guidelines call for, as well as the framing the entrance into the plaza itself. If we look at it from the other side, you start to get an understanding of how we clearly defining the base of the building and how dynamic that base is. In a way, it becomes a series of revolving storefronts. It is differentiated from the rest of the building in proportions, in design, in detailing, in materiality, again, something that the historic guidelines call for. But we're also kind of playing off some of the original historic elements, but rather than copying them, we're, if you look at the column and the cornice detail, they just kind of recessed what normally would be a very ornate either base or capital detail. In our case, there's just an absence of it. It's expressed in a more abstract and much more contemporary way. And as we mentioned at the beginning, as we started organizing the west facade, you can see that there is a center pavilion, which obviously is very different from the center pavilion, but it's distinguished from its wings in its proportions, materiality, and things of that nature. So another way to kind of addressing the symmetrical nature of the historic building, but in a much more contemporary way. And here's the west facade of the building. One of the things we like to point out, because it is hard to capture it in a still image, it's the revolving nature of all these bay windows as they go from east to west. The easiest way probably is to see it on the cornice itself. So the dynamic articulation of the facade will interact with daylight, and it's going to change appearance daily, which is something that's, again, hard to capture. The building obviously has clearly differentiated base, its main body, again, with deeply recessed windows, and then it's crowned with what's integrated with the rest of the facade, right? We do have a more contemporary version of a cornice detail that it's very dynamic, but rather than being something like you see on the building on the left, which I can say that because it's one of our buildings, we're not trying to just use ornamentation on the building. We really wanted to integrate it into the rest of the project. And then this is a night view that perhaps maybe demonstrates the dynamic revolving nature of that facade a little bit better. In terms of materiality, I think that Carl covered it very well. We've done a lot of studies with different brick colors. When we tried to use the red brick, we felt that it was competing with the historic building and blending with the historic building. So we picked a warm gray color that not only relates to the sandstone of the building, but it's also very neutral and acts as a backdrop for the historic building, while relating to some of the gateway buildings that were constructed at a later time, which you can see at the bottom image here. In terms of the lighting, the historic building is poorly lit today, with the exception of the big sign. We see a lot of opportunities to improve the exterior lighting, not only on the east facade, but west facade as well, because we're going to have guest rooms facing the west facade, and we feel that it would be nice to kind of celebrate the building and really highlight some of its architectural elements. And then obviously we talked about the interiors and possibilities, how we can change the settings in the Grand Hall for different functions without really compromising its historic nature. Canopy design, we're not going to talk about, as Carl mentioned. That's really something where we would like your input on. We haven't developed the design enough, but we wanted to know what your opinions is and where the boundaries would be. Thank you for listening to such a long presentation.
Thank you very much. Nice presentation. Commissioners, who has questions for the applicant?
So I have a couple. I can see, it looks like you've got ramps at the end coming into the Union Pacific building on each end on like the 3rd and 5th floors of the hotel. Is that right?
Those actually, when the gateway was constructed and they brought the building up to code, they had to introduce additional stairs which exist today. So we're basically just replacing those freestanding stairs by adding those connectors or bridges between the historic and our building.
Is there any wall on the ground level though? Can you just walk, that 17-foot opening, you just walk through it, or are you putting some barrier up there? Or is it just open on the main floor? Is it just, when you're outside between the two buildings, can you just walk through there? I couldn't tell from the plans.
The ground level will be actually connected to the historic building the same way those retail stores are connected to it today.
So it's actually enclosed. You couldn't get into that open area without coming in the front door of the hotel.
Correct. Just like it is today.
Okay. So my other question is, are you planning on making any changes inside the Grand Hall? I'm thinking in particular the floor. Will you do anything to that floor? Obviously the murals you'd probably leave, but what changes are you going to make as part of converting this space in there to the different use? What are you going to do to the Grand Hall physically?
So I'll take a stab at that, and Amir can add to my comments. Generally speaking, we want to work with the Grand Hall as it is today, including the materials that are there, the floor materials. There are some areas where there's been some settlement in the hall.
I could see it wasn't even today.
Yeah, so there will definitely need to be some remedial work to deal with settlement and just issues of that are related to that. There's cracking in the walls, things like that. So there will definitely need to be some restoration. We have not done a complete interior design yet. We would like to activate the hall with furnishings and turn it into a very warm, inviting space. But physically, some of the things that we may do in there would be reopening the arches in the upper part that had the connection to the bar space that's up on that second floor, so there is a food and beverage outlet there. We may open up some of those things and create some of the kiosks and retail experiences that used to be part of the station historically. But generally speaking, we want to essentially furnish the hall and make it a very warm, inviting space that'll also help with the acoustical challenges in there right now. The acoustics in the space are very difficult.
Will you replace that tile floor then, or is that a possibility? Is that a likelihood?
I think there's a possibility that we will have to restore it, but I don't envision that we would completely replace that and go with a new look in there.
Yeah.
But there could be some area rugs added
Sure.
as we do an interior decor execution on there. We'd like to preserve the wainscot, all of the historic elements that are there, but as Amir pointed out in his presentation, over time, what was a very ornate space was kind of downgraded a bit. Carl also mentioned in his comments that what used to be skylights that had a lot of natural light coming into that space have just been covered up with plywood and painted black, and so there's no longer that natural light that used to come into the space. So we'd like to look at trying to restore some of the historical lighting that was in there. Yeah.
We have
Go ahead.
a follow-up question on going back to the connectors, the bridge connectors. Are those open bridges? Is that the current thinking?
Yes, our current thinking that would be open because we're trying to keep them as simple and delicate as possible to kind of minimize the impact on the historic building.
Okay.
Esther, do you have questions?
One of the things that came to mind as I was looking at your renderings was the possible congestion that might be caused with the entry. So when the cars pull into the hotel, but you seem to have explained that, saying that you are looking to use the parking spaces that are currently available at the gateway, and also that you notice that those coming into the hotels usually use Uber, taxis, or whatnot, and there's also tracks nearby. But that was just a concern for me, just because we came in today and it was really tight to get in, and I was just wondering about how that would affect traffic on that road with increased, increased cars coming into the hotel.
Yeah, good question. One of the things we really like about the location is the tracks, the transit that's there. And what we've noticed over the last 20 years is just a tremendous decrease in traffic as a result of ride sharing and public transit. And when you're in an urban environment, there doesn't seem to be a lot of traffic. That said, we do have the auto court that exists currently right in front of the building. And right now it's very congested because I think when they renovated the gateway, they added a bunch of lights in that area, probably too many for the circulation that would like to there. So we envision removing some of those. There's a rendering up right now that kind of shows, at least conceptual, how we would see redoing that space to make it a little less congested, but still bring the ability for cars to get in, drop off, and then if someone is bringing a vehicle, they would park in the gateway parking that exists today.
My other question was regarding, I know this is not part of what we do, but security. I've been to Paddington Station in London, and I know there's the hotel there as well we stayed in, and they had keys. So are you planning on having keys for the guests so that it is a thoroughfare? The Grand Station section of it, you're going to have traffic, people that are not part of staying at the hotel. Is there security in terms of...
Well, there's always concerns about securities at hotels, and hoteliers are very vigilant when it comes to security. Obviously, the access to the guest room areas are secured with key access. We do envision the lobby space in most hotels is open pretty much round the clock with hotel security monitoring that. Currently, the Grand Hall, I think the hours that it's open right now is from 10 to 5. I think historically they've had challenges with vandalism and vagrancies and just issues that have taken place there. So I think part of the advantage of having a hotel is you have security staff and you have a greater means of securing the space. So yes.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? Paul? No? Victoria? David? Go for it,
Okay,
Charles.
going back, the topic I raised, because it's in the application, and the issue I raised with Carl about the canopies there at the drop-off, and so this is actually a good image to have up. What are your thoughts about the three options that are presented? Is this something, maybe pulling higher back, is this something that you want input tonight, or is this an item that might be coming back through staff as a future discussion item? Maybe that's a higher level. I'm not sure what's your pleasure.
Well, there's obviously three options we've studied. There was a freestanding canopy that would be completely detached from the building. Another idea was that we actually create a canopy that matches the existing canopy in the center on both sides of the building. Sorry, I'm trying to find that one. And then the third one would be kind of so this is the idea of adding another canopy over the secondary entry. We intend to use the primary entrance to the building as the main hotel entry, but there would be a secondary entrance from the drop-off we just talked about. So another option was to create another canopy that matches the center canopy on both sides, which will make sense because on the other side you have the depot and the ticket office that could also benefit from some shelter. And then the last one, which would be probably least intrusive, would be adding some kind of an awning like you see in these photographs all over Manhattan that is slightly attached to the canopy but then extends all the way to the drop-off area. So those are kind of the three options. We're kind of staying away from the freestanding canopy. The only reason we even considered in the first place is because we didn't want to attach anything to the building, but it's really hard to build something that it's minimal. Regardless how you design it, at the end of the day, there'll be always columns, and if it's glass gets dirty and eventually detracts from the exterior of the building, which in this case we're trying to avoid.
Mm-hmm. I think that functionally, we're merely just trying to deal with inclement weather and protection as you're coming out to either catch your taxi cab or your car's being brought up. I think that's the primary functional thing. We don't really, it's kind of a necessary thing that we have to have, but we're really seeking your feedback tonight relative to if you have any preference or direction on that.
Amir, it'd be helpful if you ran through those three options again.
Sure, I'm sorry. I went through it kind of fast.
And thank you, Charles. I didn't pick that up in the staff report.
Oops. Shoot, I'm sorry. So the first option, as we talked about, would be awnings that would be added over the existing doors on both. Whatever we do, we feel that it would make sense to do on both sides to keep a symmetrical composition.
Both wings of the building.
Exactly. And as we mentioned, there's a ticket window, which is the closest one on the north wing. The closest opening at the ground level is a ticket window for the depot, and you can see the door right next to it. So the first option would be awnings, similar to the picture that we showed. You can kind of see this here a little bit better. We felt that these are probably too small and wouldn't provide enough coverage. So we'd be probably looking into a little longer awning like the one we showed. The second option would be adding symmetrical canopies on both sides that would match the design of the existing canopy in the center. So there's an existing canopy here, and we would basically replicate that on both sides of the building. And the third one that I alluded to a little bit ago was a completely detached canopy that basically does not touch the new building. Again, this is just a very conceptual. We were looking at some kind of a steel structure to minimize the column sizes, as well as probably a glass canopy to minimize the impact on the historic building.
Yeah.
I guess if I don't know if we're having a discussion, kind of a work session comments here, but it should be questions. So
I think it ties in with the questions, so you can.
I'll try to phrase it. I'll think of how to phrase it as a question. Let's see. I think historically, the awning approach, somehow addressing and respecting the existing masonry openings and interpreting the awnings that were present on the building seems like the most viable approach, maybe compared to replicating the entry canopy, which sort of dilutes it as the prominent. So I can't word it as a question. Sorry. So
it's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Other thoughts on this, or shall we delve into this a little bit more in our executive session? Let's do that. I think we're good for now then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, public comments. We have 2 and perhaps 3 cards that have been presented. There's one card with a gentleman's name on it that doesn't have a topic. Richard, I can't read the last name. Well, let's go.
Evans, I can't tell.
Yeah. Okay. But let's start with Cindy Cromer, please. Then Tina Straley on deck, and then Roger.
My name is Cindy Cromer, and I came in work clothes tonight, not out of disrespect for the commission, but because I want you to contemplate, since no one had been talking about these easements until tonight, what someone with my shabby attire would have encountered at the entrance to this very high-end hotel. And I will change immediately after this hearing. The easements date from 1999 with an amendment in 2005. They provide for the preservation of the main waiting room of the depot as a public space. They also address programming. There's 3 documents. If we continue on the path that we have been on prior to a short while ago, as in tonight, anyone dressed as I am could be excluded or herded out of the lobby. Where does the commission fit in to respond to Commissioner Senson's comments? You have authority over signage, and I assure you that unless there's signage indicating that there's a public access easement, no one will know, because hardly anyone knew until a short while ago. So I think that's important. I also think it's very important to delineate exactly where the easements are in the documents. They are spelled out in survey language, which I cannot begin to interpret. So here's where we were a short while ago. There was no indication of the easements in any of the materials submitted by the applicant. None. I looked at all the drawings. The RDA, a party to the contracts, failed to respond to the planning staff's request for comments. Nothing about the easements showed up in the fact sheet or the staff report, and there was no reference to signage in the applicant's material which would inform the public about access. So what am I asking you to do? The same thing that Carl added to his suggestions, which is that you specify that at least in some of the documents, the easements be mapped as this continues through the process. And then also, I'd like you to add signage regarding the easement to the list of things you will revisit in the future. I'm going to wait to hear what you decide, and then I'll go get out of these shabby clothes.
Thank you. Tina Straley, would you like to come forward?
Thank you for this opportunity. I have, well, first of all, I want to say that I'm in support of the project. I would like to see this hotel built at the Gateway. I live at the Gateway. I live in the condominiums. So this is very important to me. And that also brings up my concerns, and that is the view of the hotel from the west side, and not having any view of the depot anymore, that this hotel really cuts off that side of the Gateway. And My third concern is that although the presentation stated that the hotel would try to complement both the Gateway and the depot, one of the significant things that the Gateway Mall tried to bring over was the slanted roofs, and you could see it on what used to be the clock tower and also what was the Barnes & Noble building, trying to bring that architecture from the depot into the mall. And I don't see the look of the hotel as carrying through either one, the look of the mall or the look of the depot. And I just wondered why some of those architectural features were not included. And those are my comments.
Thank you very much. Roger Borgnick, please.
Thank you. I'm Roger Borgnick, 881 East 2nd Avenue. I've worked on this building for over 20 years, and with the Future Moves Coalition and the Chamber of Commerce Transportation Management Association, we worked in 1998 to make it our truly remarkable world-class intermodal hub. Well, we failed. So we now have that at the Uncentral Station. I consider it the greatest urban design faux pas this city has done that I know of, and certainly the hardest loss in my career as an architect, as a planner. We worked that this is such a special place at the end of South Temple, with a grand hall that is rivaled by none in the city, save the Capitol, but you know, those government buildings are. This was a public place for all. And the conversion of that space to a luxury hotel lobby, the general public will not feel welcome. They might be welcomed. And of course, as we know, we need security, unfortunately, in too many of our buildings, and certainly in a luxury hotel lobby that will be very present. And I've tried to go into the Ritz in Paris, and I didn't make it very far. So we have a easement in perpetuity for not just access, but use. To clarify as best I can, in the easement for the plaza, there is discussion about the view easement, or there's a title called view easement, and I have not yet found the definition. I was in those negotiations with the mayor and staff, and the idea was that this was an iconic building that should be able to, oh, we get there and then light rails just on the other side. It still was a transportation issue. I think to diminish those commitments signed by the owner, signed by Roger Boyer, in its multiple transfers since then, I think it's the responsibility of this committee, of the Planning Commission of the city, to honor those and make them right. We know that signage is important, but I think there are also architectural invitations with lighting, with materials, with invitational space that says the public's welcome here. I know many won't be because it's just an incompatible use as a general public place and a luxury hotel lobby. I don't know how you're going to resolve it. It seems very important that the people of this city, the general public, rich and poor alike, have a right to experience that hall in its historic and wide use. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Would the applicant like to come back up and respond to any of the comments or add anything further? If so, please come forward.
Thank you. In no particular order, We talked earlier about the easements, but I want to just state from day one when we got involved here, we know exactly what the easements are. There is a public easement there and always will be. It's not our intention to change that at all. We really want to embrace that and continue to see this being a very active place. So, and I do believe in our materials, the easements are shown, they're referenced in the site plan. We have the documents showing exactly where they are. So we're very much aware of where the easements are located and don't intend to change the fact that there will be public access to the building. I'll let Amir address the comment about the roof form and views from the west. We acknowledge that building a new 8-story tower on the back side of the building is going to impact the views from the west. It's our understanding that the showcase protected view in the city's plan is really the view down South Temple to the front of the building, and that certainly will always be the front door of the hotel. But we do acknowledge that if there's going to be a hotel there that's viable, there will be a building on the back side. There's also been, wasn't raised in the comment here tonight, but there has been comments made that, well, couldn't you just design it with twin towers on the back or something different? And there has been other studies that have been done that just are not feasible and still would have essentially an impact to the views from the west. You want to address the comment about the roof form?
Yeah, and another thing I'd like to bring up, obviously easement has been a hot topic tonight, and as Jeff mentioned, we're not that foolish to think that we can just slide under the radar. We actually proactively brought up these easements in our very first meeting with the Planning Commission, because we wanted to be proactive about it and understand who is it that we need to interact with and better understand what these easements are, if they need to get modified, how they would get modified in terms of the actual building footprint, things of that nature. And understanding it's something that really lies with the RDA, but we haven't really made enough progress to know who we need to speak with and how to resolve all of these issues. But it's been something that we were aware of from day one. As far as the roof issue is concerned, I can appreciate the comment of the architecture. Big part of the reason why the roof is flat is because we're trying to keep the height of the building down, and if we add another slanted hip roof, shed roof, or mansard roof, obviously that would only increase the height of our building, which would make it very more visible from South Temple. We tried really hard to keep the density of program of the building below the mansard roof, so when you look at it from South Temple, that it would not be taller than the central pavilion of the existing building. At the end of the day, we fully understand that our building, as Jeff mentioned, will conceal the west view of the historic building, and we don't take that lightly. But we think that just like the architecture, there's a balance to this design approach and the project in general. Right now, we have a vacant building that it's not visited by anybody. There is no community gatherings there. There is no people coming to look at it, whether they're rich or poor. We have a building that's losing its significance in the community because it's simply abandoned. And the vitality of this existing building really depends on the vitality of the new building and how successful the new building is going to be. And we're trying to strike a very balanced approach where we revitalize the Grand Hall and make it a public space and make it as accessible as possible to everybody. The new hospitality trend is really not, the hotels used to be kind of like casinos, self-enclosed, and they like to keep their people in the hotel and in their restaurants, and the public wasn't very welcome. But that has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. What we see across the country, we do a lot of hotels, is that people really want to experience the city, and the hotels are really integrated into the urban fabric and vice versa. Some of the best gathering spaces for young people, for young professionals, are actually hotels these days, and that's very much what we're trying to accomplish.
Commissioners, other questions for the applicants? Thank you. You can take your seats and we'll go into an executive session to discuss this.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
You need to close the public hearing, please.
Okay, thank you. I guess before we go into executive session, I need to officially close the public hearing. So the public hearing is now officially closed. Let's move into executive session. Who'd like to start? David, will you set us out here?
Well, I'll throw a couple of sound bites out. First of all, I think this
You could tweet if you want.
I think, yeah, right. Can tweet some sound bites. I think this is a superb solution. I really do. When I first saw it, I was impressed by the crescent form, which is, as we all know, a classic urban planning strategy. And the way the crescent embraces its focal point, which is the terminated vista of South Temple Street at the Union Pacific Depot. It's, in my opinion, absolutely superb. There are other aspects that I like as well. One is that it does not use red brick, that it does not have a pitched roof, and that it is a contemporary crescent that respects the historic building.
Esther?
I too like the design. I think it's beautiful, and I do like the fact that you are opening up the space that has essentially not been used for a while. But I also hear what the public is saying and the feeling excluded from this beautiful place. And I would hope that we could consider the public's request for signage and just make sure staff is aware of that and it's incorporated somehow so that the public can also feel welcomed there.
Well, we could probably work that into a motion. Go ahead, Robert.
I largely just endorse what David said. I like it. I guess I'd like to respond a little bit to some of the comments, the concerns rather that I've read and heard. It's always hard when developers, and I've spent 40 years representing developers, but it's hard when they build something new because somebody's impacted by it. But I promise you the first thing anyone would do before they spend this kind of money would have their attorney make sure that they're building something in conformity with these easements, number one, and number two, to Paul's point, that's just not before us. That's up to Paul down there and the city staff to make sure that things are complied with, but that's not our job. And ours is to look at a new construction in an historic building and district, and I think they've done a nice job of planning something that'll be a real nice amenity. So I don't have any concerns to voice about it.
Thanks, Robert. Paul?
Last fall, I had a chance to stay at a hotel in Boston that is an adaptive reuse of a building that's on the National Historic Register. It used to be a jail. The name of the hotel is the Liberty Hotel, which is funny and ironic. But that building was dilapidated and effectively abandoned, and the use of it in the hotel context just completely changed the public's ability to access a building that was effectively off limits, literally off limits, to a place that was incredibly dynamic, beautiful, and accessible to a wide range of people and interests, from anything from coffee to a drink after work to a nice dinner, similar to what I think is being proposed here. The hotel was similarly large and behind the historic structure. I will say that this building that's proposed today, I think the architecture is really, head and shoulders above that example, and that was a quite nice building. But I think the west facade of this is going to become an iconic part of Salt Lake. I've never seen that sawtoothed brick design, and I think it's just quite remarkable and progressed to a level of detail and attention that I don't think we get to see very often at the commission. So I really am an enthusiastic supporter.
So you can say that you stay to the Charles Street Jail. What were you in for?
2 nights, and that's it.
Charles?
I would second, I think, most of what's been said. I have had some concerns going into it, and I think the more we look into the details of it, I think it's been successfully realized, fairly quite appropriate and responsive to the historic building. Really, my only questions, and it's really for the commission, I think, is commissioners, is the number of, and how they are addressed, the kind of the number of additional restoration, adaptive reuse, augmentations, however we want to define it, to the building. We have things like the entrance canopies, signage. I think what was presented seems in the package is kind of calm and respectful to the building. Canopies, the hall restoration elements, which all sound positive, but the devil's in the details. You know, how far do things need to go sometimes. All sounds very positive, though, and I'm really supportive of it. I'm just kind of curious, commissioners, what we want to see back, and I'll stick with just the canopies and maybe the entries to this building. You know, there'll probably be new entry systems that will be needed in dilapidated openings or whatever it might be. Are those things that we would want to have come back here? The canopies in particular, maybe, I mean, as a rather large element on the building front. So I don't know what. And could they come back as now a question maybe for Michaela first. Could they come back as a work session if the overall proposal was given a green light tonight? Can things come back as informal work session items to the full commission?
As a work session, or do you want to separate out that particular element?
I don't know. What are the options?
I've got a motion cooked up here that'll separate out a few motions.
I want to throw in my 2 cents before you make a motion. Listen, Charles.
I don't know. Do you have thoughts, Michaela? There are options to.
I think there are options.
Okay,
to
to revisit
separate out
that.
elements.
Okay.
Well, and before you say that, to your point about separating out, you're going to the Planning Commission here in a couple of weeks, right? So if they come back with changes from that too, it'd be a good time to look at that as well as what you're wanting to break out. So
Well, I'm not sure I want to break them out necessarily. I'm just saying that there are elements that the canopies, the entrance canopies are legitimate. If they went with a full wing length freestanding canopy, that's a substantial decision and impact to the building.
Right.
They don't want to, it doesn't sound like. I think they want to be much more sensitive than that. But my concern is that that's progressing, and it's staff, but it's. I'm just curious.
Well, maybe we in a motion ask them to come back with that particular element for our.
with a number of particulars.
Uh-huh.
What were your thoughts?
I would like to ask Carl to put an image up on the screen, please, if you could. It looks like it's page 21 out of the applicant's documentation.
The one with the fountains down the back?
Yeah, it's
where
the
you're seeing
view,
the front entrance?
view looking east from the gateway fountains up the sandstone fountains toward the west portal entry into the building. Yes.
Ah, right, that one, okay. Let's see if we can find it first, eh?
While Carl's pulling that up, maybe I'll distract us
Go
for
for
just
it.
a second. I think the easements obviously inform the design, and so I think that's where it can be applicable here tonight. I hope, I'll just express it, I think, one more time for all of us, is that I hope that they are clearly investigated by the right people that investigate that sort of thing, and that the applicant is also responsive to what they actually spell out and make it accessible building to the city.
Well, it seems like we could, as part of our motion, also ask for signage to specifically address the public welcome to these spaces. It needn't be anything onerous for the applicant, but things that clearly state, if you're approaching the door, that the public is welcome to enter and enjoy this lobby at any time of the day, that it is a public space. As Carl's looking for that, I'll start by saying, overall, I really think it's a superb design and proposal. I think it, David has said it all, said it first, and the other commissioners have also said that. The only aspect that I'd like to have us take a look at is the approach from the west. As you rise up from the fountain in the gateway, there you go. You rise up from the gateway fountains and approach the building. As you look at the building from the west, the scale of the portal into the courtyard seems a little small. I know, as we were told on site, that's actually some 19 feet high in there, I believe, and the width of it looks like it's a full bay with a half bay on each side. This image perhaps is part of the issue, but it looks like just a small opening. It's not a welcoming portal. It doesn't say gateway to me. It doesn't draw me through the building, into the building, welcome me in as part of the public. It doesn't offer me any view. And maybe some simple approach. Perhaps you pull out the single room that's above it, or some way to make that portal, again, I'll use the word gateway, make me want to go in there if I'm not a hotel guest, make me want to move through that space. I know as you step back and see the whole west facade of the building, you've got the vertical shaft of the differing materials that point down to that, but someone passing through on foot is really going to be looking at the shadow, at the darkness in there. Just some sense of wanting to be attracted to that space, which I'm not getting, at least from this rendering.
Kent, I'll just, if I can chime in on that, I think if in fact there is some west view easement language out there that has some application, I think this is sort of starts to address that as opening this up to some amount of the view, that the realization of this is quite an interesting architectural solution. At the same time, challenging, as you've pointed out, about how to draw from here to there and how to connect from here to the historic building.
Yeah, and that's why I took some exception to the statement that the easement is merely pragmatic legal language, that I think it draws into some architectural response as well. Now, that said, I don't know that how or if we tie that into a motion here, but it's something I guess at this point, could I
would try to avoid the easement language in the motion. I took a look at the easement during the meeting, and it's not as specific as
could be
as what it might have been represented. And there's nothing specific as to a west view. It's basically a view easement across the plaza easement, which is
interesting.
Its own weird language, but.
I think David's wordsmith.
Yeah, Paul, I got something pretty generic here, and I think we'll cover it.
Or could this be something in terms of our rules of order here? Could we have a brief discussion with the applicant regarding this issue? Pose the question to them
on the easement.
I think they've covered it fairly well.
Well, not on the easement. I was just thinking of if they had some sort of thought or some response to the issue I've raised.
As far as opening up that gateway?
Just give like...
Yeah, no, it's your prerogative as the chair to invite them up to answer some specific questions.
Would the applicant like to come up and just have a discussion on this? Tell me your point of view and how you came to this solution and how it might respond to some of the thoughts I've just expressed.
Yeah, well, specifically to the easement issue, there is no question we are trying to maintain a portal through and a strong connection with the Gateway Plaza down below. We hadn't given thought to what the implications would be of making that taller, and what the impact could be on the guest room floor above that. I don't know.
I got a question this way. Could you consider the option of Kenton made the observation about removing the guest rooms, but what about just turning them into a bridge that connects through that?
One of the challenges by removing the guest room is the egress, for those of you egress.
Yeah,
because
that's why I was
right
suggesting
now,
the bridge.
we're going to have to add stairs that will basically encroach into the portal, which is probably the last.
Hence the bridge suggestion.
Yeah.
So the bridge idea, or maybe even looking into how we can deal with columns, maybe there's options to look at the spacing of the columns. I think that's something we'd like to review. I think getting rid of the guest rooms would be probably challenging in terms of the end result.
Yeah.
But that's something that we could definitely review and work with staff to come up with a solution that perhaps is appropriate for the building and addresses your concern.
Yeah.
Was just a question I have is the idea of a bridge. So if you, so I'm clear on what's being, one of the challenges we have is the elevator core and the vertical access to the tower is on the south side of that. So you'd essentially be coming up, you're on the second level, you're coming through. Is the idea that you would then have a bridge, you would open that up, you'd lose rooms, you'd have a bridge, you'd go outdoors and then come back indoors to the rooms on the other side? Is that the thought?
Yeah, well, no, I didn't say it was going to be easy.
Possibilities.
I don't know the plan in depth.
I think we would certainly be willing to look at that. It's hard to just react to an idea like that, like this. We'd be happy to look at it as part of our detailed design as we move forward. I think the recommendation is that there's a lot of details that are going to have to get worked out down the road with the staff. And we'd certainly be willing to look at that in the context of all of the details that are going to have to get looked at.
Okay. That sounds good. Thank you. Right. Have you got something for us, David?
I think I got a motion cooked up here. So, based on the analysis and findings listed in this staff report, testimony, and the proposal presented today, I move that the Commission approve the application PLNHLC 2018, number 616, construction of a hotel building, a major addition to the Salt Lake Union Pacific Railroad Station, and the demolition of non-contributing structures at approximately a number 2 South 4th West, with the following conditions. I'm going to state 4 conditions here. The first is that approval of details of alterations other than those mentioned in condition 4 to the Union Pacific Station building be delegated to staff. 2, that approval of the details of the design of the new hotel and associated landscaping is delegated to staff with the exception of number 4. 3, that all issues related to the public use easements be addressed by staff and vetted by the Planning Commission. Number 4, that final canopy designs, exterior signage, west entry, and details of the Great Hall restoration be submitted for approval separate from this motion.
We have a...
Your condition number 3 referenced the easements that you wanted to delegate review by staff, but also you said something about the Planning Commission?
Yeah, we can't
Correct.
tell
So-
the Planning Commission what to do.
That's a concern as to.
Then I would like to amend my motion, condition number 3, to state that all issues related to public use easements be addressed by staff.
Good. We have a motion.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. May I have a vote, please, starting from my
We're gonna-
right?
Do we have an opportunity for discussion?
Oh, we get to
Sorry,
discuss
who
it, of
seconded
course.
the motion?
I did.
Thank you.
Charles. Yes.
Addressed by staff in what way?
Well, I wanted to be vague, to be honest with you.
I interpret that to mean to make sure that the development is consistent with whatever those easements. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
make sure that
In
there's
terms-
no violation.
The term staff can also mean legal staff,
Right.
not just planning staff.
All right, so
All
we're not talking
administrative
about a
staff.
All
return
administrative
visit to
staff.
landmarks to discuss the easement again.
Correct.
Unless we go through a legal review of those and determine that the project wouldn't work in light of the easements, and then they'd have to come back with a different proposal.
And Dave, could you repeat 4?
Okay. I had to write it
Thank you.
twice. That final canopy design, exterior signage, west entry, and details of the Great Hall restoration be submitted for approval separate from this motion.
I have a substitute motion.
Okay?
Exactly David's motion minus condition 4.
Oh, wait, do we have to vote on David's motion?
No, substitute motion becomes the superseding motion.
Very good.
If it's seconded.
If it is seconded.
Why do you want to take that out?
Very good.
Paul?
We'll listen to a substitute motion then.
Yeah, the rationale for that, I think, is that I feel like we have an applicant who has demonstrated a ton of responsibility and attention to detail, and we also have the good fortune of having a really, really good staffer on this one. And I feel totally comfortable at this point saying, staff, handle it, you'll get it right.
Can I just jump in here on the Great Hall, details of the Great Hall restoration?
I put that
That's
in.
not the exterior of the building.
Yes, but isn't it included in its National Register?
We understood we could look at the inside, Michaela. That was part of, since it's a historic building.
A landmark site. Carl explained on site that it was, since it was a landmark site, that the interior was under our purview, or is that incorrect?
It certainly will be under state histories.
Yeah.
Carl knows.
In this particular case, the National Register nomination actually goes into some detail about the interior of the building. The interior of the building is also defined as a public space by the easements we have in place. It makes complete sense that that's treated as a part of the building of major interest in terms of it being a public historic station building. Normally, we would not have interior reference material and detail within a landmark building. This would be a different case, in my view.
Do any of the standards or design guidelines relate to interiors? I feel like we're going to go into that hearing and just wing it.
Well, perhaps the way around that is if your substitute motion of putting it before staff rather than coming back to us would sidestep a challenge like you've just suggested.
And I would think that many of our standards apply to interior restorations. This is an odd situation because many of the standards talk about retention of significant features and the appropriate treatments. There's no design guidelines that the city's ever developed for an interior, so I think that's not a possibility, but I think the basic standards would provide some guidance, would provide reasonable guidance there.
Well, I'd piggyback on that the Grand Hall is in essence like an exterior space. It's a grand public space.
Because it's public.
And that our guidelines would generally cover it in that regard.
Okay, so therefore, where we stand, we've got David's motion with an adjustment, a substitution by Paul to allow.
With no second.
We need a
currently.
second on Paul's
Yes.
motion.
Right, I was going to put it forward. Can we have a second for Paul's substitute amendment?
Well, could you repeat yours? Motion, because
My motion is a mirror image of David's motion without the last condition regarding the canopy, the signage, and the
Grant Hall.
the Grand Hall details, with the intention that those would all be dealt with by the staff.
So I agree with what you said, Paul, about how this has been handled and what it is, but I'd still probably leave it in there since we're going to look at these other things just because we can. I mean, we are going to approve this project in concept, but we've got a few details we want to make sure that we pass on, so I'd
Well,
probably
I
leave it
guess
in
that's
there.
the point, though. Paul is, if I understood him correctly, was saying that would go to staff. We wouldn't
Right.
see this again.
Right, and I'm saying, if we're going to see the first three, I'm fine with seeing the fourth, since it's such an important part of this building.
Well, we wouldn't see
We
the
aren't
first
seeing
three.
the first
The first
three.
three are all staff.
Oh, I apologize, I
Yeah.
misunderstood that.
Okay. So do we have a second for?
I'll second.
Very good. We have a motion, a substitute motion, and a second. Can we get a vote, please?
Stoll, yes.
Richardson, no.
Shepherd, no.
Hyde, no.
Yes.
That motion fails on a vote of 1 to 4.
3 to 2.
3 to 2.
Okay. Okay, so we'll go back to the first motion. Would you restate that for clarity, please?
One last time.
As written by staff, adding a third condition that all issues related to public use easements be addressed to staff, and a fourth condition that final canopy designs, exterior signage, west entries, and details of the Great Hall restoration be submitted for approval separate from this motion.
Very good. We previously had a motion and a second. I would put it up to vote, starting with Paul, please.
Aye.
Hyde, yes.
Shepherd, yes.
Richardson, aye.
Esther, aye.
That motion passes unanimously. And the appeal of historic landmark decision, anyone aggrieved by the Historic Landmark Commission's decision may object to the decision by filing a written appeal with the appeals hearing officer within 10 calendar days following the date on which a record of decision is issued. The applicant may object to the decision of the Historic Landmark Commission by filing a written appeal with the appeals hearing officer or the mayor within 30 calendar days following the date on which a record of decision is issued.
Mr. Chair, just as a matter of clarification, this part that will be decided later is not intended to be a separate application, correct? It's just, this is a
continuation.
This is a partial approval, the majority of this application being approved. I just want to make sure the applicant isn't under the impression they have to submit a second application.
I think staff could handle it either way.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's your choice, the applicant's choice.
There's additional expense and time involved
Right,
with that.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let us take a 5-minute intermission. We've been here for almost 2.5 hours. Take a quick break and come back. Thank you very much, applicant.
trying to.
Oh, that's fine, just,
here.
okay.
Well. Okay. All right, sorry about that.
All right, the next item on the agenda is attic additions at approximately 1017 East First Avenue. We'll begin with the staff presentation.
Okay, so this is let me pull it up here, sorry. There you go. This is a petition for a minor alteration and special exception for 2 already constructed attic additions on a historic home located on 1017 East First Avenue. The additions consist of a dormer on the side and a rooftop addition on the rear of this contributing home. A little background on this project. The property is currently in non-compliance with Salt Lake City regulations. A stop work order was issued for this property on last year, August 2017, after a complaint for work without permits. The owner contacted staff at the time, but did not work to pursue a historic approval. And because no permits were issued, a certificate of noncompliance was recorded against the property in May this year, 2018. We have records that show that the owner had prior knowledge of the permitting and minor alteration processes before initiating the work. We also have records that show that the work continued after the stop work order, and one of the additions was enlarged after staff informed the homeowner that the additions were not appropriate and needed to follow the historic design guidelines. Going into the project, the purpose of these additions was to provide headroom in the attic to create usable space. The 2 attic additions are rectangular in massing, as you can see in red and yellow over there, and are located adjacent to an existing shed dormer and an existing chimney. The new dormer has a shed roof situated below the ridge of the roof of the existing home, with a pitch similar to the slope of the roof of the existing dormer. The rooftop addition matches the ridge of the roof of the existing home and adds height to the east of the home, as we can see over here. Sorry, I forgot to change that. The new and the existing dormer were cladded with natural wood shingles on all sides, and the rooftop addition was cladded with a combination of painted white pine siding and natural wood shingles and rough saw shiplap panels. The project also includes the installation of 2 new windows on the attic additions and 1 window replacement on the existing dormer. All new windows are made of composite material. The single-family home is contributing to the character and integrity of the Avenue's local historic district. The home is a 2-story Victorian eclectic Queen Anne, constructed in 1892, and it has a defining central block with a projecting wing massing in the front and a roof form characterized by hip roof and lower cross gables. All of the structures on First Avenue between Q and R Street are considered to be contributing to the historic district, and all principal structures are fairly intact. There are 2 homes on each side of First Avenue that have front dormers. They're shown in yellow over there. And 2 of the homes on the same block face, the 2 homes to the west of the property, have small side dormers shown in blue. No other rooftop additions were found on any of the homes. These are current photographs of what the house looks like now. This is the front facade of the home, where you can see the dorm on the right of the structure, right below the chimney. This second photograph shows the east side of the home as you see it from the street. And you can see both additions and the existing dormer in the middle. And the third photograph shows the rear of the home with the rooftop addition. In the staff report, you'll find 6 key issues. The first one is related to the mass and scale of the alterations, and it's related to Design Guideline 8.14, in which I found that the rectangular massing of both attic additions is incompatible with the triangular shape of the front gables and hip roof of the historic home. The new dormer is bigger and more imposing than the existing dormer, and it is readily visible from the public way. The rear rooftop addition is taller and bulkier than the two dormers, affecting the perceived height and scale of the historic home. The second issue is the roof form and the slope of the additions related to Design Guideline 8.16. The new attic additions have roof forms that are uncharacteristic of the style of this historic home. The third issue is the exterior materials and style of the windows related to Design Guidelines 8.8 and 8.10. Found that the different pattern of the shingles draws attention to the new dormer, which is strongly discouraged in attic additions. And the dormer windows present issues related to size and proportions in relation to the existing windows. The fourth issue is the visual impact of these additions, which is directly related to the basic principles of new additions. The constructed attic additions, due to its mass, height, and roof forms, have changed how the home is perceived from the street. Both additions are not considered visually compatible with the original building, interfering with the original roofline of the home and compromising the home's historical significance. Issue number 5 is the effect that these additions have on the character of the building and the historic district, also related to the basic principles of new additions. The roof form and the height are considered primary character-defining elements of a historic home, and the design of the additions, the attic additions, are not sensitive to those elements. The historic structure could lose its contributory status, which would represent a loss to the subject property, the section of First Avenue in which this home is located, and the historic district at large. Issue number 6 is related to the special exception requested for additional height for the building and wall height, and is related to the general standards for special exception, in which we understand that special exception in historic districts should be considered for designs that further the purpose of historic preservation. And staff has found that the height exceptions for the current design of the attic additions do not further the purpose of historic preservation in this case. So with all of that, we find that the attic additions do not meet the applicable standards for approval, and staff is recommending that the commission deny the request, both the minor alteration and the special exception.
Thank you. Are there questions for the staff? Thank you very much. The applicant, please come forward. If you wish, make a presentation to us or discuss this matter with us, please.
I don't have, it didn't transfer over. I don't have Apple at home, so it's not going to transfer over. But a lot of my ideas actually came from the avenues that I live in. I essentially purchased my home in 1991. It was zoned a triplex at the time of purchase. At that time, I have been renovating the home and have taken out multiple permits through the Historical Society to do and have what I have now, except for the attic. I added an addition to the back with a foundation, kitchen area, a garage, and that dual deck porch that you see at the front was also part of the renovation. The time I bought the property, it was dilapidated and in bad shape and needed a lot of attention. I also, at the time, my roof was in bad repair and has been for quite some time, has been leaking for many years and progressively gotten worse. My roof, when the wind would come, it would blow all over the neighborhood and cause, problems and picking up pieces and things of that nature. I'd been saving to do a renovation up there and to finish that area off. During the course of that time, I actually got the Planning Commission. I called Carl Lathy to come and just look at what I was doing or thinking of doing, and he told me the provisions that I needed to do at the time. So I was trying to get people involved to help me with the architect as well as the construction of this. Unfortunately for me, there was nobody that was willing to take my project. I was having architectural design issues as far as getting somebody employed on that, and things kept moving forward, and it was August, and I was in a situation where in every corner of my roof I was having leaking and structural issues. So I leave work for months at a time, and I could not bear the thought of leaving another leaking year of winter, knowing that the process would take 3 to 4 months just for approval. I'm in the middle of February, maybe, when I can start this design. I decided to go ahead and finish my roof, but in the meantime, go ahead and put the dormers so I could have better access and the area that I needed to expand that area. So I went ahead and did that, knowing that I needed to probably take the permits that I should have taken. But I was under the constraints of a roof that literally, if a winter that would have came like we had in '93, I would have it in my home. And I already had problems with water all through my home, and there was buckets, like I say, on every corner that you could see through areas of my home. That roof has never been replaced since 1893 as far as the base of it, the wood structure and everything. And there had been cedar, and then there was a thing of asphalt that was over that I was removing. So I went upon myself to get what I needed because it's expensive to tear through something. I could have re-roofed maybe, but structurally I still had issues. So the dormers that I actually put in took care of some of the structural problems that I was having, and that's the fact that my roof was literally starting to bow. I had actually went up there and put 2x4s with support screws and stuff to keep the certain areas from actually collapsing. So that is why I'm here today, is because, yes, I did do the work, and I tried to keep as with the theme of the home as possible, with using all wood products, shingles, cedar, wood shingles, and to go forward and to make it aesthetically as pleasing as possible for the area that I live in. I mean, you can see from when I bought the home to where I'm at now, I'm a resident there. I've taken it from a triplex to zone a single dwelling home, which increases everything, including my taxes, knowing that I can never go back to that area of triplex and rent it. I wanted it what it is now. I've done everything up to this point within the guidelines of the historical and planning committee. This just caught me off guard to where I couldn't deal with the fact leaving town and leaving my roof in the disarray that it was in, knowing that I was going to maybe have a roof that collapses. It was collapsing in certain areas. Literally, I took hydraulics to actually do what I needed to shimmy it back up in certain areas and then support it over the years because it was in that much of a disarray. So basically, that's where I'm at with this project. I'm here and apologizing for what I've done to this point. There again, I think aesthetically, if you really look at what I've done, I've tried to keep with the theme of the area. And I do know that there are standards and things that we all adhere to as far as the planning committee, but I also, in witnessing what my neighborhood has, there isn't a single home that's a cookie cutter home. They're all designed, they're all laid out different. They all have different dormers, different porches. It's the avenues, that's what it is. That being said, I don't know what else I can put into this presentation. I can be honest with you, being here for the length of time I waited to be here today, it's got me to the point where I'm barely able to talk to you folks. I'm worn out. I'm literally worn out. But that's where I'm at. My house is still a mess because it's not finished, and I need to get this figured out to where we can get it palatably done and move on. I am a single earner. There's only one income in my home. I work for a living. I don't have a ton of money. I'm doing this the way I did it because this is financially feasible for me as well. But it's not by any means shabby. I spent a lot of money on the materials that I purchased, and that's pretty much where I'm at with this project.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Are there any questions for the applicant? No, thank you. You may take your seat. Now let's open this to public comment. I've got a number of cards here, so I'd ask you as you come forward, please be brief and to the point and limit your comments to 2 minutes, please. Kim Bell, come forward, please. Okay. Joseph Bell.
Thank you. I'm Joseph Bell. I live at 1024 East First Avenue, which is actually directly across from the applicant's home. We're in full view of the home. I can't really speak to the course of events that brought us here today as far as the compliance or things, but I did want to state that as a homeowner in the area, that we have no issues and are in support of the addition as it stands as far as the visual impact goes. If we were here under normal circumstances and having a hearing about the proposed design or that, we would have no opposition to that. We support the design, and we don't think that the visual impact has any negative impact to the neighborhood. There's a lot of eclectic additions that have been done in years past that didn't have the scrutiny of a historic landmark commission, I believe, and this one is far better than a lot of the ones I've seen in the avenues. So I have no opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda Orm, is it?
I'm Amanda Orm. I live at 1007 First Avenue, so 2 houses down. I feel like any addition that is done well, like they have done, is good for our neighborhood. My house needs a lot of work that I can't afford to do, and so I know that I really appreciate people being able to put the work into their homes and spend the time and money to. And so for me, the look of their home, it adds to our neighborhood. Anyway, so I'm for it. That's all.
Good. Thank you very much. Charles Stormont, please.
Hi, my name is Charles Stormont. I live at 1029 East First Avenue, so I live in the Pepto-Bismol Pink House immediately to the east of the home at issue. And I came to speak and let you know that I fully, almost completely agree with the staff report and would request denial of the application. I think that Ms. Lima has highlighted the 6 key issues very poignantly on pages 6 to 8 of the staff report. I noted that Mr. Leith also noted in his correspondence with Mr. Webb that he expected staff to recommend a denial. I think the noncompliance with the requirements of the historic design guidelines is fairly apparent. There are a couple of things I wanted to note in the staff report where I have slight additions, disagreements, or corrections. Ms. Lima noted that the lot is 36 feet wide. It's actually 34 feet wide. I have a printout from the county assessor's office showing the legal description. The reason I think that matters, and I'll get to this in a moment, is that almost all of the work that has been done on this home has been done from my property through illegal trespasses. They never once asked permission to come onto our property. With respect to the requirements set forth in the code for minor alterations, I would respectfully disagree with Ms. Lima on item 6. The pre-existing east dormer has not been repaired, but instead replaced with an entirely new and larger structure and does not match the materials being replaced in design, composition, texture, or other visual guidelines. The shingles don't match. The window has been completely replaced with a new modern window, not a wood framed window like every window in my home. And it's also completely blocked out by the additions on either side of it. It actually joins one of those additions. I brought a photo from the upstairs of my home that I hope highlights some of those issues for you, and I'll share this with you visually here. May I have a few extra minutes?
Keep it brief, but
I'll
you
go
can
quickly.
continue just for a moment.
I kind of, if I can walk through them, I'm not that organized, I'm sorry. But if you compare it to the street view from 2011 and the staff report on page 11, you can see how significantly different it is. Item 5 of the minor alteration requirements, the craftsmanship of the historic home. I would ask you just to take a close-up view of this and look at how it was constructed. Look at the pattern of the nails. They're not even in a straight line. This is not representative of the type of craftsmanship you see throughout the historic avenues. I would ask you to please consider that. I note that Ms. Lima has highlighted the lack of cohesiveness with the neighborhood and the effects on the immediate area. I couldn't agree with her more on those issues. With respect to the special exception requirements, I wanted to speak very quickly, if I could, to the impairment of property value, the undue adverse impact on the area, and the compatibility with surrounding development. These are a couple of photos from my daughter's bedroom. She used to be able to see the sky and the sun to a limited extent because of the nature of the roof, the hip line, the angle that it sat on. That has now been completely eliminated from one of our bedrooms. This is during construction, March of 2018.
Would you try to wrap it up, please?
Same picture afterwards. This highlights the changes to the dormer, and this photo shows the profound impact to our privacy in our backyard. The loss of view, the loss of visibility, the loss of privacy are all profound impacts on the market value of my home. And I believe those criteria are set forth very clearly within the Historic Landmark Commission's guidelines, and I would ask you to please consider those.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's...
I just have to say, it's really hard to sit here and bash your neighbors, but I feel like I have to speak up. I feel like I have to teach my kids that the rules matter.
Yes.
I would have been happy to work with them had they ever approached me, but they didn't. And I just want to conclude by thanking you for your time and service on this very thankless
Thank you very much,
job.
Mr. Stormont.
I'll leave these with
one more card, Richard Gores.
Thank you. I live on 1029 2nd Avenue, and I've had a lot of dealings with the Historical Society and the Landmark Committee, and they've all been very positive. Thank you. As this whole process has been going on with my friends through the block, exactly through the block from where I live, I know that this roof that Dennis has restored, even though it had to be done at the moment, was in dire need of repair because it was about to collapse. I saw it with my own eyes. And since I have worked on my own house as well, with the help of your committees, Dennis worked outside of the state, and so a lot of the work and a lot of the permits were not attained when they should have been. I also know that the gentleman who just spoke before has a tremendous hatred for the neighbors. I don't know why. And there was quite a ruckus when people came on his property with a ladder. And instead of being the attorney that he is, he was not. He was atrocious. And so the addition that is there now, I'm totally in favor of. It may need some changes if you folks feel that it needs to be, but it is a very good addition. In fact, in the avenues, there are quite a few atrocities that have been committed, and nobody has ever taken any action to correct it or to improve it. And so I'd say be a little merciful with my good friends on the avenues, especially with Dennis. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment who might not have brought a card forth yet? No, sir. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. We don't have a public debate here. If there's no one else from the public, I forgot to ask if there was a community council representative here who would like to comment. If not, then the applicant is welcome to come back up and respond.
The only response I have is I did
Come on, please approach the mic.
I did ask for permission. I let them know that I was going to be doing the roof that day that I started to re-roof. And within a very short period of time, once the contractors started doing their job, it did become a big fiasco, to the point where there was almost a physical altercation on the property over it. And so I'm just letting you know, I did let them know that I was going to be doing this roof, as well as my neighbor on the other side. And I even let people know across the street, hey, it's going to be noisy. I've got this going on. So that being said, I just want to make the record straight. I did notify Charles Stormont that I was going to be doing my roof and that it would be done that morning. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Webb. At this point, if there's no other public comment, we will close the public session and go into executive session. Commissioners who would like to comment? Paul?
I don't think this is even close for all the reasons that staff stated. I think the report's spot on. So I'm not even going to talk about the project particularly. The one thing I wanted to highlight is that I've been a little critical of the city's response when we have people that go around the historic landmark process. And in this case, I feel like the process worked beautifully, just exactly like it was supposed to. There was intervention right at the beginning. This entire thing was eminently avoidable. And it's just really nice to see it when the process works right, and it's unfortunate that we're sitting here where we are because it seems like it's utterly unnecessary. But I support the staff's conclusion.
Robert?
So I'm right where Paul is, and I feel bad about this because just listening to the public comment, I'd love to vote with these good neighbors that all like each other and are supportive of each other for the most part. And as to comments that were opposed to that, I don't think most of those comments were relevant to the issue. What's relevant here is that there's laws that need to be followed in the historic district, and they weren't followed as the staff outlined. I've raised my family about 2 blocks from this house. I've lived there for 20 years. I've renovated 2 houses in the avenues. And I got to tell you, and I'm a real estate attorney, and I was pretty frustrated with a lot of the requirements that we had that cost a lot of money to comply with. But we can't allow this to stand, because then we undermine the whole system. You know, everybody wanted to get around some of these rules sometimes, and some tried to, and some got away with it in the middle of the night. But we've got to, you know, for the integrity of the whole system and the whole avenues area and the historic districts, we've got, you know, if we're going to keep them historic, we can't make exceptions just because we'd like to be merciful, because we would like to be. I would like to be, but it seems to me like we've got to make sure people comply with the historic district regulations, and the staff's outlined those, and so I'm in favor of denying the request.
Charles?
Nothing to add.
David?
Well, I concur with Paul and Robert. I think this is largely about precedence.
Esther?
I do concur with Robert. At the same time, I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Webb's difficulty that he faced in getting your project done. I know that's hard, but we do have to keep with what the laws have for us to do here.
Thank you. Someone prepared to make a motion on this, please?
Based on the information listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the commission deny the request for a certificate of appropriateness for the attic additions at 1017 East 1st Avenue, as presented in petition PLN HLC 2018-00517, and deny the request for additional building and wall height special exceptions, as presented in petition PLN HLC 2018-00676.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Can we have a vote, please? Charles?
Any discussion?
Discussion. You're right. Is there any discussion?
Nope.
Not hearing any discussion. We'll go to a vote. Charles?
Aye.
David?
Richardson, aye.
Stoll, aye.
Hyde, aye.
Aye.
The vote is 5 in favor, none opposing. The motion passes. The application is denied. Yes. Appeal of Historic Landmark Decision. Anyone aggrieved by the Historic Landmark Commission's decision may object to the decision by filing a written appeal with the appeals hearing officer within 10 calendar days following the date on which a record of decision is issued. The applicant may object to the decision of the Historic Landmark Commission by filing a written appeal with the appeals hearing officer or the mayor within 30 calendar days following the date on which a record of decision is issued. Okay, that case is closed. Moving on to the next case. This is a nomination for National Register Boulevard Gardens Historic District. And we begin with, as usual, with our staff presentation. Please proceed.
All right. Good evening. I'm here to basically just facilitate a review of a National Register nomination for the proposed Boulevard Gardens National Historic District. I will make a disclaimer. Planning staff, I'm sure you're aware, did not prepare this nomination. The gentleman who did prepare it is out of town. We have a representative here, I believe, who's willing to answer any follow-up questions you might have. As the certified local government, the Landmark Commission has the opportunity to review this nomination and make a recommendation to the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service. SHPO already considered this request at their October 25th meeting, but any comments or input you want to provide will be forwarded along with theirs to the keeper of the National Register. So getting to the district, the Boulevard Gardens Historic District would include a single subdivision that is approximately 3 acres in area and located in the Ballpark neighborhood. As you can see here, it's bounded by Quail Avenue to the north, West Temple to the west, Main Street to the east, and there's a private alleyway that runs directly to the south of the subdivision. There includes 23 single-family homes, which were constructed between 1929 and 1931, which are organized around a central green space. You can see that kind of bisecting the development. Here's a present-day photo of that central green space, so you can see all the homes front onto this area, and there are 2 parallel sidewalks that run the entire length of the development. The nomination calls the green space out as the most distinguishing feature of the district. So again, the development contains 23 single-family homes with Tudor Revival and/or arts and crafts elements. The nomination notes the homes were all uniquely designed but are unified through common styling and massing, the use of brick, white trim, peaked gables, hipped roofs, front porches, wood mullioned windows, and some do contain diamond pane leaded glass windows. This slide shows 34 Boulevard Gardens, which is just an example I pulled out to show that none of these homes have received any significant additions onto them, but some minor alterations are common. You'll see this is a good example. They all started with kind of the Tudor style features in the gable peaks, and a lot of them have this horizontal, might be vinyl or metal siding now. This one, the front porch looks the same, but you can see from between 35 and 85, those front tripartite windows were turned into 2 large picture windows. So this is just an example of minor alterations that are common in the area, but nothing significant, no significant structural additions have been made to any of the homes. And the nomination claims that the district is eligible for nomination because it meets criteria C and is significant in areas of landscape architecture and architecture. The 3 reasons the nomination provides is that it's the most architecturally substantial and intact garden suburb constructed in Salt Lake City. It has 23 small Tudor Revival cottages, all of which are still considered to be contributing, would be considered contributing. It also represents the work of a notable Utah architect, Slack Winburn. He has multiple other properties in the city that are already on the National Register. It also reflects key trends that were going on in U.S. history, such as the Better Homes movement, and auto-driven suburbanization that allowed home ownership to become a key component of the American dream. So to wrap it up, staff concurs with the findings included in the nomination, and we're recommending that the Landmark Commission provides a positive recommendation to the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service.
Thank you. Are there questions for staff on this? Is there, I guess there's not an applicant per se on this, or no one else to come up and present? Or is it community council?
Yes.
Member, would you like to come forward and speak, please?
I don't know what, I'm here mainly to answer questions. I think the staff report...
You identify yourself, please, for the record.
Oh, my name is Bill Davis. When this petition was initiated, I was the chair of the Ballpark Community Council. I no longer am, but I am still on the board. I'll give you a little history. When I became chair, we had an objective to improve the neighborhood. It had the potential to be a very cool little pocket neighborhood. But the neighborhood had suffered from a lot of out-migration and development and that sort of thing. I used to describe it as a neighborhood that was easy to not notice because it's very long and thin and you could drive through it and not even notice it. It had essentially been zoned out of existence. Most of the single-family homes in the area were actually, the zoning had been changed to RMF 35 and 45, which we discovered and initiated a master plan amendment and actually had the bulk of the neighborhood rezoned back to R5000 or single-family homes, which is why I'm saying it was essentially zoned out of existence. It was 191 homes, which was the largest downzone in Salt Lake City's history by a factor of 10. Another thing that we decided to do was, this is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. And many of the homes, if you could beam them up in the avenues, people would say, what a wonderful little avenues house that was. And I actually served on this illustrious commission that you're on from 2009 to 2013, so I know the value of historic preservation. And so this Boulevard Gardens is one of the most complete courtyard garden developments left in the state of Utah. It's essentially unaltered. We had looked at doing a local historic district, but for various reasons decided just to list it on the National Register, which is a voluntary program to incentivize historic preservation. We had numerous meetings about it. One in particular was dedicated specifically to this issue for the residents. We did do, the last one we actually did polling. We got out of this 23 houses, we got 17 votes, 11 were in favor, 6 were opposed. Other things that we're doing in the neighborhood, we did a lane realignment on 17th South, a CIP grant to provide a little commercial node for the neighborhood. So I think we've been very successful at improving the neighborhood, and this designation is one aspect of that. We hope actually to do an expanded designation for what I call the traditional ballpark neighborhood. I sometimes call this our test run to learn the process. We had actually started looking at it and then heard that somebody was doing research on it, which was David Ammett, who now works for Preservation Utah. It was very opportune that he was, because normally to do a reconnaissance level survey requires funding, which community councils generally don't have, with a few exceptions like the avenues. And so he did a very thorough reconnaissance of the area, which you're the recipient of the staff report. That's all I can think of offhand. So any questions I can answer?
Right, thank you. Anybody have questions? Thank you very much. You can return to your seat, thank you. We now have public comments. I have 9 cards, so please be to the point and try to keep it brief. We'll start with Ann Jimenez, please.
Hi, I guess I'm the only one here that's against being on the National Historic Registry. I am honestly wondering why we are here to begin with, because I thought this would have ended at the National Historic Board meeting on Thursday, October 25th at 1 p.m. Can you tell me, is this normal? Is this normal to come here after the National Historic Board?
I'll address that when you're done, after the public hearing closes.
Okay. Myself and 5 other homeowners are against it vehemently. We do not want to be on the historic registry. We don't want to have, it's our house. We don't want to have to go for what the previous homeowner just had to go through, of going through councils and committees to see if we can remodel our house or put a roof or a thing on top of our house or get a garage. We don't want to go through any government planning things to go through. Now, the question I have is, will we have to go through you to get a garage?
No.
Hip roof?
No, it's purely honorary, and this board is just making comment on
There's
the
a lot of misinformation out there.
nomination.
That's what I've heard, but this is a slippery slope. Myself and the 5 other homeowners don't want to get on the slippery slope, but it looks like we're here. We're overruled. There's nothing I can do or we can do about it, because the more I've tried to impress upon my neighbors how it's in the future is a bad idea. Unfortunately, I got more neighbors aware of it, and it turned against me. So let you know I'm against it.
Thank you. And maybe when public comment is done, we can address what this all really means if it goes forward. Jeremiah Millman? Okay. He didn't note whether he was in support or in opposition, so I can't speak to that. Miguel Gonzalez, please come forward.
Thanks for the time. I'm Miguel Gonzalez. I live on 81 West Boulevard Gardens. Have lived there for about 3 years. Discovered this charming little neighborhood that everyone loves, and I think it has all the qualities to be preserved. To be on the register, I support the decision if it was forward. I think we live in a wonderful place where we're almost forced to interact with your neighbors, which is something that you don't have a lot anymore. So I think that it's something worth preserving, something, I mean, you just have to deal with your neighbors. You see them walking in front of your house, you see them working in their yards, so you have to deal with them and be civil, and at the end of the day, we all live in the same place, and I think it deserves recognition. Those are my comments.
Thank you, sir. Now, these cards are marked. It doesn't say whether or not the people wish to speak. I'll just read your names. If you'd like to come up and speak, you're welcome to do so. Adriana Costello just said in support. Jake Strickland, in support. Joe Nelson, in support. Jeffrey Curry, is it? In support. Deborah Wofford, in support. And Jillian Olmsted, Very good. That was easy. Is there anyone else who would wish to come forward and speak? Okay, in that case, we can, yes. Please come forward and state your name. Speak into the microphone for us, please.
My name is Tim Williams. I'm here representing my aunt, Mary Kuzel, who actually owns the home. And we're currently renting to my brother. But I would just like to say that for decades I've seen very few boulevards, very few garden-type streets like this. And this is a very unique street, and the houses are very well kept. And despite the decline of the neighborhood, these homes have always been kept up. So they alone stand as like an island in the, diamond in the rough, an island that stands out and should be preserved in some way, if only figuratively, to say they stand apart and they are worth being preserved.
Thank you. All right, at this point, unless there's more comment, we will go into
talking to Michaela
executive session. And I'd like to start this by close the public meeting, move into executive session. I'd like to ask Charles or David or someone to explain how this works. What's the point of all this?
I might be, I'll say, uniquely qualified. At least I've had the experience. So in previous careers, I managed the National Register program from the Utah State Preservation Office, and then for a number of years managed the renovation tax credit program. And so let me just address those really briefly, try to address some of your concerns, and try to clarify. The National Register nomination is a state/federal process. It is independent of city operation. This body is contacted because Salt Lake City is what is known as a certified local government. They receive some pass-through preservation grants. Hence, when there's a National Register nomination within the city boundaries, that nomination comes to this committee for review as it's done tonight. As Paul mentioned, a National Register...
I'm sorry, sit down, sir.
It's all's fair, all's fair. As Paul said, the federal designation, the National Register designation, does not mean that you return to this committee. That's only if the Boulevard Gardens were to follow a separate process and become a city historic district. That's the important thing. Now, National Register listing does not come with constraints. You're still able to modify and sell your house and do what you wish to do. What it does come with is an incredible incentive program that allows residential properties to be renovated to certain preservation standards, which is what we've been discussing here this evening, what we use in our committee. And renovations, I've used some of the numbers, sometimes it's been a few years, $10,000 worth of renovation work over a 3-year period that meets those standards can qualify for a 20% state income tax credit. So your $10,000 project costs you $8,000. It's a great incentive. It's an optional incentive. You do not have to follow it. And hopefully that assuages you and hopefully interests many neighbors. There are modest things on these buildings that could use renovation work. The tax credits, those tax credits are available for exterior as well as interior work. I'll state that I own a historic home in central Utah and I just put a new furnace in. That's going to qualify for the tax credits, which is sort of a pretty sweet deal for owning a historic home. Anyways, I hope that helps. I'd be happy to talk to you after about it a little bit more if you'd like, but there. I've said my spiel. Okay. Beep, beep, beep.
I'll piggyback on that. I've always thought that the National Register designation is all carrot and no stick. You get the tax credits, but you don't get the oversight. So sadly, there's a lot of misinformation about these programs. In other states, it may be different. If you live in Nantucket Town, you can't paint your front door without approval. We're very different here. This did go to State History last week. I was there. and it was approved by the Board of State History. So this, our recommendation will be forwarded to the SHPO on, if it's positive, this will continue on its march towards National Register nomination. Would like to bring up a couple things that came up at State History, which are quite interesting. One was a legal thing, a couple legal things. You see that picture right there? It's an ad in the paper. You'll notice that it's by the Hallerton Judge Trust Company. Well, Mr. Winburn, Slack Winburn, who was I think an extremely prolific architect here in town. He had a variety of styles. He designed the Unitarian Church in the neo-colonial style, and the Northwest Pipeline building, the old public safety building, in a modernist style. Very prolific man, and he chose to design this in what we call today the new urbanist style, which we see out at Daybreak. But at any rate, this went under construction just as the market crashed in 1929, and like many projects, it ended up on bank receivership, and they sold off the properties. The properties are on fee simple, and I'm going to mention that because of that it's relative to the central space. So you can visualize looking down the central space, each property line goes right down the middle of that grassy boulevard. And that's why each area looks just slightly different. Some people have installed sprinklers out there, people handle it differently, but overall it has that beautiful park-like look that has created this absolute gem in our city. That's really the bulk of what was there. I think you guys know what you have. The owners know what they have. It is a true oasis and very deserving to be on the National Register of Historic Places.
Thank you, David. Comments? Can I have a motion in regards to this subject, please?
I move to forward a positive recommendation to the SHPO and the Keeper of the National Register.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Let's take a vote, starting with Robert.
Hyde, yes.
Aye.
Stoll, yes.
Richardson, aye.
Shepherd, aye.
The motion passes 5 votes to 0. And
move to adjourn.
Do I have a second? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.